In 2000, my family moved into a beautiful house in North Walpole, New Hampshire. It was a fresh start for all of us, and the house was gorgeous. But from the very first night, I felt something was different about it. The house didn't feel empty, even though it was just the four of us living there. It felt crowded, almost as if many people were sharing the space. The house always had a pleasant smell, like fresh flowers. I initially thought it was some fancy cleaner the landlord used before we moved in, but the floral scent would randomly appear throughout the 4 years we lived there, and we never had flowers in the house. About a year into living there, my sister and I were trying to fall asleep on a school night. Just outside our bedroom was a large room with hardwood floors that connected to 2 other rooms. As we lay there, we suddenly heard what sounded like a woman in heels walking across the floor. The clicking of the heels echoed through the quiet house. None of us owned a pair of heels, so it was strange. The sound continued for about a minute before stopping. My sister and I had no idea what it could have been. That same year, I won a camera from a school fundraiser. It was one of those older cameras that required film. I had fun taking random pictures of the rooms in the house, the trees outside, and anything else that caught my eye. When I got the film developed, I was flipping through the photos when one picture stopped me cold. It was a shot of the trees outside, but in the photo there was a woman. She was dressed in an old-fashioned dress and apron, her hair tied in a bun. She looked like she was turning her head toward me as I took the picture. The figure was dark, so I couldn't make out her face, but the shape of her bun and clothing was clear. When I showed the picture to my family, it gave us all goosebumps. Not long after, when my sister and I were at school and my mom was at work, my dad had a strange experience while home alone. He was in the kitchen doing dishes when he heard someone yell, "Hey, Dad!" Startled, he walked into the living room, thinking we might have come home early. But the house was empty. He realized he was completely alone. Another incident happened about a year later. My dad had just picked my sister and me up from school. At the time, we had a van with a sliding door that took a lot of strength to close. My sister refused to close it because she'd once slammed her thumb in the door. When we got home, I got out of the passenger seat while my dad and sister were already outside. I noticed the sliding door was still open and went to shut it, but before I could, my dad called out, "Hey, thanks." Confused, I asked, "For what?" He replied, "For closing the door." I told him I hadn't touched it. We both looked at each other, baffled, because none of us had closed the door. The creepiest moment happened right before we moved out in the summer of 2004. My sister and I were riding our bikes outside when I stopped in my tracks. I glanced up at our bedroom window, and there she was, the woman from the photograph, staring out of the window. I froze, chills running down my spine. We always suspected the house was haunted by the ghost of the landlord's mother, who had died years earlier and used to live there. Even now, I wonder if the house is still haunted and if the current residents have seen or heard anything strange like we did. In March 2009, I started working for a small book publishing company in southwestern New Hampshire. The business was run out of the owner's attic, and the staff consisted of just 5 of us. Myself, my assistant, the shipping manager, the VP, and the president. There were also 3 people who worked in the warehouse. It was a tiny operation. The building itself, built in the mid-1700s, was a classic New England farmhouse with wide plank floors, original glass windows, and a collection of antiques. Like many old buildings, it was known to be haunted. Everyone who worked there had experienced something odd, including me. But this story isn't about the building's ghosts. My bosses had 2 dogs, Sadie and Tessie. Sadie, a black lab, was lively and full of energy, while Tessie, a chocolate lab, was a sweetheart but suffered from numerous health problems. When Tessie was a puppy, she'd swallowed a paperclip, which caused internal injuries and led to ongoing kidney and bladder issues. Over time, she also developed neurological problems that made her behave in unique ways. One of her quirks was refusing to climb the attic stairs without someone helping her. She'd scramble up the first 3 steps to the landing, then stop and whine until someone coaxed her up the remaining 12 steps. After a few weeks at the job, I became Tessie's unofficial helper. I would gently guide her up the stairs, encouraging her every step of the way. Over time, she began to trust me completely. She'd lie under my desk with her head on my feet while I worked, and we formed a close bond. She wasn't my dog, but I loved her deeply. That first winter was tough on Tessie's health. She was in and out of the vet, refusing to eat, throwing up, and sleeping most of the time. It was heartbreaking to see her so weak. But then, she seemed to get better. For 2 or 3 months, she regained her strength, gained weight, and looked healthier than ever. Unfortunately, her recovery didn't last. Her health began to decline rapidly, worse than before. In mid-April, the VP asked me to take Tessie to the vet. She was busy that day and needed someone to bring her in. I didn't realize at the time that this was her final trip. Tessie's legs were bandaged from recent shots and blood work, and she was too weak to move on her own. I gently picked her up, placed her on the back seat of my car, and drove carefully to the vet. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, her sad chocolate eyes meeting mine. I thought I was taking her to get better. I didn't know I was saying goodbye. I checked her in, hugged her tightly, and told her she'd be okay. As I walked back to my car, I was overwhelmed with sadness. I sat in the driver's seat, smoking and crying for half an hour before finally driving back to work. That afternoon, Tessie was put to sleep. When I found out, I was devastated. I felt betrayed and furious with my bosses for making me deliver her to the vet, knowing how much I loved her. For weeks, I barely spoke to anyone and kept to myself. A few weeks later, my bosses had to travel to Concord for medical appointments. They asked me to stay late to answer the phones and watch the house. It was no problem. I had extra work to do anyway. They took Sadie with them, and I made sure all the doors were locked after they left. While working alone in the office, I heard faint scratching sounds on the hardwood floors below me. It sounded exactly like a dog's toenails. The noise grew louder, and before I realized what I was thinking, I thought, Tessie wants to come up. I froze as the scratching sounds climbed the 3 steps to the landing outside the attic stairs. I heard a soft whimper and the distinct sound of a dog lying down with a huff. The moment felt surreal. Tessie had passed, yet it was unmistakable. It was her. I didn't tell my bosses what I experienced, but I did share it with the shipping manager. She smiled and said, "Of course Tessie came to say she loves you. You were her mom." Tessie was just over 2 years old when she died, and I still think about her coming to say goodbye when I needed her most. I'm in my 20s now, but this story happened when I was around 14. I've been hesitant to share it because I was afraid people might think I was making it up. After reading stories on this site, though, I feel like this might be a safe place to share what happened and maybe even get some insight. It was spring break during my freshman year of high school, and I stayed at my uncle's house in Boston. After a day of catching up, my uncle told me about a cool colonial house he had stayed in for a weekend and wanted to show me. After about a 30-minute drive, we arrived at this massive brick house. It had that eerie, horror movie feel. I was supposed to stay there for 3 days before heading back to my uncle's place, and I was fine with that. He assured me it wasn't trespassing. He knew the owner and had stayed there before. The first day was uneventful. We arrived late and spent most of the time exploring the area. The night, however, was a different story. I woke up to faint voices coming from another room. Couldn't have been my uncle or his husband. They were snoring downstairs. The voices were hard to make out, but I felt like I heard phrases like, "Who's that person?" or "What are they doing here?" At the same time, I couldn't be sure if I was actually hearing those words or if my mind was filling in blanks. The voices didn't stop, but eventually, I fell back asleep. The next morning, I didn't mention it to my uncle. He's skeptical about anything paranormal and would probably laugh it off. The day itself went smoothly, and we spent most of it outside talking and hanging out. That second night, I went to bed without any issues, but I had a nightmare that shook me to my core. In the dream, I was back at my own house, sitting on a twin bed in the room I shared with my brothers. Across from me was a priest holding a Bible, reading aloud from it. He wasn't looking at me, though. His eyes were fixed on the head of the bed. When I turned to see what he was staring at, I saw a pitch-black figure sitting there. The darkness around it was almost tangible, like it carried its own oppressive energy. I've never experienced such fear in my life. The figure turned its head to look at me, and I froze. The priest's voice grew muffled as I stared into the figure's face. My chest tightened, my throat constricted, and I was paralyzed with terror. The priest began screaming for it to leave me alone. I woke up moments later, gasping for breath. For a while, I thought I saw shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, but I chalked it up to my imagination playing tricks on me. I didn't sleep well that night, but I eventually convinced myself it was just a nightmare. The following day, I casually mentioned the bad dream to my uncle, who didn't make much of it. Then came the third night, which I'll never forget. The nightmare I had was worse than anything I'd ever experienced. In it, I was in the kitchen at my actual house, and the black figure was standing right next to me. It didn't speak, at least not out loud, but I knew what it was saying. "Let me show you something." Suddenly, I was surrounded by complete darkness. The place it showed me was indescribable, so dark, so evil, that I can barely think about it without feeling sick. It was a place no one, not even the worst person on earth, should ever experience. I didn't just feel afraid. I felt like my very soul was in danger. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing like I'd just fallen from a great height. I lay there facing the wall, trying to calm myself down, when I felt the bed sink behind me, as if someone had just sat down. I heard heavy breathing right behind me. My body froze, and I couldn't scream or move. After about 30 seconds, the weight lifted, and the bed returned to normal. The next morning, I didn't tell my uncle or anyone else what had happened. I briefly mentioned it to some friends at school later, but they didn't seem to care much. It wasn't that they didn't believe me, it just didn't seem like a big deal to them. Even now, as I type this, I get chills thinking about it. That house and those nights are burned into my memory, and I've never experienced anything like it since. I still don't fully understand what happened, but it's something I'll never forget. I'm Odessa, 22, from New Hampshire. About a month ago, I experienced the most terrifying and bizarre encounter of my life. I've been hesitant to share it with others because many people are dismissive or close-minded about these things. But after finding this site, I feel this might be a safe space to share and maybe get some insight. I've always believed in spirits, but the ideas of demons and possession seemed like something from movies, not reality. That belief changed completely after one unforgettable night. Less than a year ago, I became friends with Robin and Dan, a kind but shy and slightly awkward couple. They've always been there for me when I needed support. Recently, they took in a new roommate, Cody, an old friend who had been struggling with his family. When I stayed over, I shared a room with Cody. He slept on a large mattress on the floor, and I slept on a futon next to it, separated by a small table. Robin and Dan had their own room off the kitchen. The first 2 nights were uneventful, except for Cody's strange sleep behavior. I woke up both nights to hear him whispering in his sleep. It wasn't typical mumbling. It sounded like a strange, gibberish language. I didn't think much of it at first, though I'd never heard anything like it. The second morning, I mentioned it to him casually. He brushed it off, saying, "Oh, really?" and laughed. The third night, however, was different. Kat, another friend, joined us for the evening. After Robin and Dan went to bed, the 3 of us stayed up talking before crashing on Cody's mattress. I slept on my side, facing away from them. As the night went on, I started hearing noises, throat clearing, faint grunts and whispers. At first, I thought Kat and Cody were awake, maybe messing around, which would have been awkward. I rolled over to check and saw Kat sleeping soundly. I poked her awake and told her about the noises. We laughed nervously, brushing it off as Cody's strange sleep-talking. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to see if we could interact with him while he was asleep. That was our biggest mistake. Kat started by asking Cody silly questions like, "Hey, did you run out of hot dogs?" Each time she spoke, he twitched slightly and whispered more gibberish. It was creepy but still funny to us. Then I jokingly said, "Wow, he sounds like a demon. Kat, you should ask him if he's a demon." The moment those words left my mouth, the entire room turned ice cold. The atmosphere became heavy and oppressive, and Cody sat bolt upright, his eyes rolling back into his head. He started gagging and snarling, and Kat and I bolted to the bathroom, slamming the door behind us. At first, I wasn't scared, just shocked and confused. I kept asking, "What just happened?" But as we listened from the bathroom, the situation grew darker. Cody's whispers turned into full-fledged talking in a deep, guttural voice that didn't sound like him at all. It was like two voices were speaking, one in gibberish, the other occasionally slipping into English. I heard him say, "They are still in there." Kat was shaking and crying, while I was frozen in denial. I kept hoping it was some elaborate joke, but the oppressive cold and dark feeling told me otherwise. After about 15 minutes of silence, I worked up the courage to check on him. When I opened the door, Cody was sitting upright on the mattress, staring at me with a sinister grin. His face seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. I slammed the door and locked it again, finally feeling the full weight of fear. Cody started whispering again, his voice fluctuating between gibberish and a deeper, more sinister tone. At one point, he begged Kat, in his normal voice, to open the door. "Kat, please, open the door," he said over and over. I told her not to respond. After nearly 45 minutes of this, I screamed and banged on the bathroom door, desperate for help. The moment I did, the cold, heavy feeling lifted, and Cody snapped back to normal, asking, "What the F***ck just happened?" When I cautiously opened the door, Cody seemed disoriented. He claimed he didn't remember anything but admitted he could feel his body moving. Then, he revealed something chilling. He had a spirit named John attached to him. Cody said John had been with him for years and assured us he meant no harm. However, his stories about John, how his ex-girlfriend feared him talking to the spirit in his sleep, and how his grandfather had a similar attachment, didn't make me feel any better. When I tried to explain that what I felt was evil, Cody became defensive, insisting that John wasn't a demon. But as I apologized for joking earlier, the room turned cold again. Cody's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed onto the bed with that same demonic grin. Kat and I ran out of the apartment without looking back. We wandered the streets until morning, eventually seeking help from a nearby priest. He listened to our story and explained that Cody's spirit was likely a demon and that the situation was worsened by Cody's refusal to see it as a problem. The priest assured us that demons feed on fear and advised us to stay strong and keep faith. We returned to the apartment, determined to carry on as if nothing had happened. Cody acted as if everything was normal, but Kat and I knew better. Later, Robin and Dan learned what happened and decided Cody could no longer stay with them. They contacted his mother, and Cody moved back home. I've since cut ties with Cody, but the experience left me shaken. Kat kept in touch with him, but it ended badly when he broke into her apartment one night. She's now seeking a restraining order. Looking back, I'm grateful I haven't been haunted by nightmares, but the experience opened my eyes to things I never believed possible. While some people dismiss it as mental illness or drug use, I know what I felt. The temperature changes, the dark presence, and the voice. It was something far beyond the physical world. When we first moved to Concord, New Hampshire, in July 1995, we lived in a small 2-bedroom condo near downtown. It was a charming place, perfect for 2 adults, though it became less ideal once we had our first child. It was too small, with no yard, so we eventually moved. The building itself had an interesting history. It was originally quite old but had been partially destroyed by a fire in the 1980s. It was rebuilt using much of the original beams to comply with regulations, allowing it to maintain its grandfathered status, as the setbacks from the street didn't meet current codes. This also explained why we occasionally smelled burnt wood in the apartment, even though there hadn't been a fire in years. We used one bedroom as our sleeping area and the other as a home office since I was working from home at the time. Shortly after we moved in, I started experiencing something odd while working in the office. I often felt like I was being watched. It wasn't scary, just a little unsettling. This feeling would come and go for a few days, and I couldn't shake the sense that someone was there. The presence felt male, like a man in his late 20s or early 30s, and I had the impression he was wearing an old-fashioned uniform. I never actually saw him. It was more of a feeling or mental image. One day, I mentioned it to my husband, and he immediately stared at me in surprise. "From the closet, right?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "And it's definitely a guy in a uniform, like an old-time police uniform?" he added. I nodded, feeling chills. We had never talked about it before, yet he had experienced the exact same thing in that room. It was strange, but it didn't feel threatening. A few months later, a friend came to visit and stayed in that room overnight. The next morning, he casually asked, "You guys know you have a ghost in your closet, don't you?" That made 3 of us who had either seen or sensed this presence. When our daughter was born, we turned that room into her bedroom. Interestingly, she never mentioned seeing the man. I always thought maybe he avoided making his presence known to her. Perhaps because he didn't want to scare her, especially with the uniform. Who knows? Some time later, my husband and I visited the Museum of New Hampshire History in downtown Concord. While looking at old maps of our neighborhood, we made a fascinating discovery. The house we lived in had been located on the grounds of the original state prison in the early 1800s. The building that had stood on our site was once used as barracks for prison guards. Suddenly, everything made sense. The uniform, the sensation of being watched. It was as if the pieces of a puzzle had fallen into place. To this day, I often wonder about the people who live there now. I'm tempted to stop by and ask if they've ever seen or sensed the guard in that room. I hope he's crossed over, but if not, I like to think he's still happily keeping watch over the people living there. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Oh. The summer after high school, I worked for my neighbor's contracting business. We mostly did light remodeling jobs like painting, carpentry, landscaping, and building decks. The crew usually consisted of my neighbor, his partner, myself, 1 or 2 friends, and sometimes a general laborer depending on the job size. About halfway through the summer, we got a job to clean up an old, neglected house a few towns over. It needed a complete refresh, painting inside and out, fixing squeaky floors and water damage, cleaning up the yard. The homeowners weren't living there and planned to sell it, so we had the place to ourselves. The house was mostly empty, cleared of its belongings. The first few days were spent clearing the overgrown yard to make way for equipment. After that, we split into 2 crews. One working on the exterior, scraping and prepping for paint, and the other working inside. Since the house didn't have a AC, working outside in the summer heat was the better gig, and we rotated who got which job. The layout of the house was straightforward. When you entered, there were 2 large rooms to the right and left. A staircase to the second floor was ahead on the left, with a small bathroom to the right and the kitchen and another large room straight back. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, all accessible from one staircase. From the start, strange things began happening. Inside, we set up an old boombox to play music while we worked. It was one of those manual radios with a tuning knob and cassette player. A few times, the station changed on its own, jumping from 102.7 to other random stations. What made it eerie was how precisely the stations tuned in, like someone had turned the knob with perfect precision, but much faster than humanly possible. This happened when no one was near the radio, and it wasn't even by a window. The volume would also spike unexpectedly, blasting far louder than we thought the radio was capable of. Thinking it might be bad power or interference, we moved the radio to another room, and the issue stopped for a while. Other oddities included lights turning on or off, even portable floodlights we brought in. The switches themselves were physically flipped, not just a power issue. We also heard footsteps upstairs when we knew no one was up there. The most unnerving incident happened near the end of the project. I was replacing some molding in one of the upstairs bedrooms. My heavy steel toolbox, a craftsman weighing about 30 to 40 pounds, was on the floor nearby. I'd nearly finished and had packed most of my tools when lunch arrived. Since it was raining, we all gathered by the stairs to eat, joking about how the house was haunted because of all the weird stuff. Everyone was there, accounted for. Mid-conversation, we heard a loud crash from upstairs. One guy freaked out and bolted for the door. Another worker and I, sitting on the stairs, immediately ran up. The stairs led directly to a landing where you could see the entrances to all the upstairs rooms. It only took us a few seconds to reach the top, so there was no way anyone could have escaped unnoticed. In the room where I'd been working, my toolbox had been tossed across the room, its contents scattered everywhere. It had clearly been thrown with force. The tools were still rolling on the floor when we got there. The toolbox had been sitting flat on the floor, not precariously balanced, and there was no one upstairs to explain it. The window in the room was closed because of the rain, and jumping out would have meant a 15-foot drop into thorny bushes. No ladders were in use that day due to the weather. Everyone was shaken. The last couple of days working there, no one wanted to be alone in any room, and you could feel the tension. Even the light-hearted jokes about the haunting had stopped. Our boss later mentioned the strange occurrences to the homeowners. Their reaction? Whatever. Years later, I learned the house had burned down, and a friend who still lived in the area sent me a news article. Apparently, the previous owner had been a recluse after his wife died, rarely leaving the house. He had died alone about a year before we worked there, and his body wasn't discovered for 6 months. The people who hired us were his estranged family, fixing up the house to sell. After that summer, the house gained a reputation around town as being haunted. It changed hands several times, with no one staying long. Even now, thinking about it gives me chills. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts, but I can't explain some of the things we experienced. None of us knew the house's history while we were there, and after the toolbox incident, everyone was genuinely spooked. Rational explanations didn't seem to fit. It's one of those memories that will always stick with me. I want to start by apologizing for the plain title. I couldn't come up with anything more creative. This story takes place about a year ago in my house. For some context, I've been practicing astral projection and developing my psychic abilities for several years now. It's something I'm deeply passionate about, and I'm constantly reading and learning more about it. Ghosts have always fascinated me, too, especially because my mom and other family members have shared their own encounters with the paranormal. Before diving into my story, I want to share my personal interpretation of ghosts. I believe that spirits of the deceased who choose not to move on stay on Earth as invisible entities. When we see a ghost, I think it's because our third eye temporarily allows us to glimpse an alternate dimension. This might explain why we often see ghosts when we least expect it. Our minds are more open at those moments. That's just my belief, though, and I'm not trying to convince anyone else. My connection to the paranormal actually goes back to when I was around 10 years old and living in a different house. One day, I thought I saw my late uncle, who I'd never met but had heard a lot about. He had passed away in a car accident with my dad, though my dad survived. Several family members claimed they saw my uncle's spirit the day he died, walking down the stairs, knocking on doors, or just lingering in the house. I saw him sitting on the couch, clear as day. Terrified, I bolted upstairs. Another time, while I was drawing late at night, I heard him whispering my name. Those experiences stayed with me, but I never fully understood them. Fast forward to last year. I was lying in bed watching TV when I felt a distinct pressure on the mattress, as if someone had sat down or leaned on the bed next to me. The light was on, so I didn't panic. I just lay there wondering if it was real. Later that night, I was trying to astral project when something even stranger happened. My guitar, which was leaning against the wall, made a noise it only makes when someone walks past it and applies pressure to the neck, causing the tuning knobs to click. At first, I brushed it off as a coincidence. But then it happened again. By this point, I was certain there was a presence in the room. When I meditate or enter a trance state for astral projection, I become acutely aware of subtle changes around me. It's like an extra sense kicks in. It's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it, but in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. That wasn't my only strange encounter. A few years earlier, I'd seen a black shadow pass through the crack of a door where light was shining. When I turned on the light in my room, the bulb immediately shattered. I was completely freaked out and couldn't shake the fear for days. The day after the bed and guitar incident, I wanted to tell my dad about what had happened. He's usually skeptical of anything paranormal, so I wasn't sure how he'd react. Before I could explain, he interrupted me and asked, "Were you home around 3:30 p.m. yesterday?" I told him I wasn't. I'd been at work, and asked why. He said he'd heard footsteps upstairs while grading papers downstairs. He was so convinced someone was home that he called out my name and my brother's name, but no one answered. This clearly unnerved him, and for the first time, he seemed open to the idea that something strange was going on in the house. In late September 2006, I visited my friend Mike's house in New Jersey. For as long as I've known him, Mike and his family have claimed that their house is haunted. My first encounter with its strange energy happened years ago, when I was around 10 or 12. Mike and I were exploring his dark, cluttered basement, looking at antiques and old items. We noticed clothes near the washer and dryer moving, and Mike thought it was his brother playing a prank. He grabbed a plastic bat and went over to check, but when we got closer, the clothes stopped moving, and no one was there. Freaked out, we ran for the stairs, only to find our way blocked by a large painting that had somehow turned to face us. Together, we moved it aside and bolted upstairs, terrified. When we told Mike's mom, she said it was probably the ghosts. After that, I avoided his basement and rarely visited his house. Fast forward to last September, when I reconnected with Mike and began spending more time at his house. Everything seemed normal until one unforgettable night. Mike, our mutual friend Val, and I were relaxing in his room. The atmosphere was calm. He had mellow music playing, a mesmerizing visualizer on his TV, and a large fish tank that added to the soothing vibe. As we chatted, Mike brought up the time we'd seen something in his basement as kids. He reminded me about the painting blocking the stairs, but strangely, I couldn't remember that part. Maybe I had blocked it out. Not long after, I started feeling odd. The room seemed darker, and I felt disoriented, as though I was falling backward. It reminded me of the sensation right before you pass out or the spacey feeling you get when you're sick. Panicked, I told Mike and Val that something felt wrong. My heart was racing, and I couldn't focus. Mike tried to calm me down, suggesting that I might be working myself into a panic attack. He told me to close my eyes, and that's when everything changed. When I closed my eyes, vivid visions flooded my mind. I was no longer myself. I was a young boy sitting on a wooden dock surrounded by calm water and lush greenery. I could see an open gate in front of me and a small black book with a latch resting precariously on the edge. I knew reaching for the book was dangerous, but I felt compelled to get it. The scene felt peaceful yet significant, like it was from another time, perhaps the early 1900s. As these images played out, my body reacted in ways I couldn't control. I began to cry, not out of sadness but as an automatic response. My fingers turned ice cold, a sensation that has since become a signal for me during these experiences. Using a piece of paper, I blindly sketched the boy, the dock, and the scene. When I pieced the drawings together, everything aligned perfectly. It was as though invisible forces guided my hand. The next day, I returned to Mike's house. This time, another friend, Wes, joined us. We were watching a movie when I started feeling the same disoriented sensation. My face felt strange, like one side was drooping. I asked Val if anything looked off. She said my eyes changed color, and then I mumbled something I couldn't remember saying. Suddenly, I felt as though I wasn't fully in control of my body. I began to cry again, my fingers turning cold, and I spoke in the third person, assuring everyone that I, Kevin, was okay. Val started crying, too, as she felt the presence of her grandfather, who had passed away years earlier. She shared that he had once saved 2 young girls from frigid waters and received a medal for his bravery. Somehow, that connection became part of the experience. Later, as we walked through the house, I felt overwhelming energies, especially near the kitchen and dining room. I started pointing to specific areas and moving my hands in a way I couldn't control. Wes joked that the spirits wanted us to clean up, and oddly enough, I felt a sense of happiness at that idea. Then something unsettling happened. I kept focusing on a spot on the ground, an area that felt incredibly significant. As we stood near it, both Mike and I heard a whisper clearly say his name. We looked at each other in shock, realizing we couldn't have imagined the same thing. Mike became emotional, and the moment confirmed for us that this was real. Mike suggested we check his mother's room, where his step-grandfather had passed away. As soon as we approached the door, Wes and I both jumped back, overwhelmed by the energy. Eventually, we entered, and my hand moved involuntarily over a dresser, searching for something, though I couldn't figure out what. Later, near the spot, I opened a grandfather clock and found a small piece of paper with a note, though I wasn't sure if it was significant. Mike then asked if I'd go into the basement. I hesitated but agreed, thinking it might help explain the spot. With flashlights in hand, we descended into the dim, cluttered basement and entered his step-grandfather's old tool room. As we explored, I felt like I couldn't breathe, my breathing becoming slow and labored. Mike said it sounded like the way his grandfather had breathed in his final moments. Suddenly, I heard a voice from the darkness behind me. It had a slight attitude and clearly said, "It's a phone wire." Terrified, I screamed and bolted upstairs, leaving everyone behind. We regrouped in the living room, trying to make sense of everything. As we talked, I felt a warm presence beside me and sensed my own deceased grandparents nearby. It wasn't a physical sighting, but I could feel and see them in my mind. The feeling brought me comfort. That night, I stayed at a brightly lit grocery store with Val before finally going home. As I passed my parents' room, I felt my grandmother's presence and knew she was in my mom's dreams. The next morning, when I told my mom everything, she believed me, even admitting she had dreamt of her mother the night before. I live in New York and have had my share of encounters with ghosts. If you've read my other stories, you'll know some of what I've experienced. This particular story happened at the famous amusement park Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey, specifically at Kingda Ka, the world's fastest roller coaster. It was June 27th, and I was there with my camp group. Everyone in my group wanted to ride Kingda Ka, but by the time we got to the front of the line, I chickened out. 5 out of the 7 kids in our group decided to go for it, while my counselor and I stayed back. I stood by the exit gate to wish them luck and watch. As the group was getting settled in their seats, something strange happened. One of my friends offered an empty seat next to her to another kid in the group. But when the kid tried to sit down, they couldn't. Something invisible seemed to be blocking the seat. Confused, they decided to wait for the next ride. Then, to my shock, the empty seat pulled its restraint down and locked itself in place, as if an invisible rider had taken it. When the ride operator came around to check the restraints, he paused and gave the empty seat a puzzled look. But after a moment, he shrugged and sent the train off. I could hear my friend screaming her lungs out as the roller coaster launched at lightning speed. When the ride returned, I asked everyone how it was. They all said it was awesome, none of them mentioning the mysterious seat. As the next group from our camp got on the ride, I noticed the same seat was still locked, even though no one had sat there. Curious, I pulled out my phone and turned on the camera, hoping to capture something unusual. What I saw made my jaw drop. Sitting in the seat was the faint image of a teenage boy, around 16, wearing a park uniform. His arms were crossed, and he looked annoyed. I watched as he unbuckled, stepped out of the train, opened the gate, and walked past me. Then he went up to the controls and pressed a button. Shortly after, the workers began complaining that the ride's computer wouldn't launch the train because it kept detecting 3 unlocked seats, even though all the restraints were secure. Eventually, the issue was resolved, and the ride was back in operation. My friends went on it again later, unaware of what I'd witnessed. But that wasn't the last I saw of the ghostly figure. The second time we passed by Kingda Ka, I spotted him again, this time sitting on the roof above the trains. My counselor had stepped away to use the bathroom, so I seized the opportunity. Since I often talk to ghosts, hence the nickname Ghost Talker 13, I called out to him, and to my surprise, he came down. I asked him to sit and talk before my counselor returned. He introduced himself as Ricky, a former park employee. He told me he had worked at the park 2 years ago when Kingda Ka was first being tested. No one else wanted to try it, so he volunteered to be the first rider. Everything seemed fine until the train reached the top. It didn't have enough speed and rolled backward at an incredible 365 miles per hour. When the train returned to the station, Ricky was dead. Ricky said he'd stayed behind as a ghost to ensure the ride's safety, so no one else would experience what happened to him. He admitted that he had tampered with the computer earlier because he was annoyed by my friend screaming during the ride. I explained that she always screams like that, and he laughed, saying it was okay now. After our conversation, he climbed back onto the ride, and I never saw him again. Since then, I've noticed a sign posted at King Dakar that reads, "On occasion, King Dakar's train will not go over the hill. This is a normal occurrence. If it doesn't, it will safely go back down the hill slowly and stop at its starting place to be launched again." I guess Ricky played a part in making sure that warning was there. If you haven't been to Six Flags Great Adventure, you're missing out on some incredible rides, and maybe even a ghostly encounter. I'm grateful for the chance to share these experiences, the most recent of which happened just last night. These events have puzzled me since childhood. They often unfold in a similar way. I wake up during the night to see a figure standing by my bed. Unlike the shadowy, indistinct figures others have described, the ones I see are vivid with memorable specific features. For example, one time I awoke to see a teenage girl with a round face and dark, wavy, shoulder-length hair standing on the opposite side of my bed, staring at me. Slowly, she raised her hand, and I saw that she was holding a lit cigarette. To my horror, she pressed the burning tip to her neck as if to burn herself. I jumped up in fright, and she vanished. Another time, I saw a small blonde-haired girl standing at the bedside. She grabbed the covers and started pulling them back as though she intended to climb into the bed. Again, I jumped up, and she disappeared. On a different occasion, I woke to see a teenage boy in the room. There wasn't much remarkable about him except his distinctly wavy red hair. Yet another time, I saw an older gentleman with long gray hair wearing a nightshirt and holding a candle in a candle holder. Sometimes, I've awakened to see cloaked figures standing by the bed. These are particularly frightening because I cannot make out their facial features. They typically wear dark robes, although one time, I saw a figure in a white robe. I've also encountered two particularly short figures. One crouched at the corner of my bed and dressed in black, and another standing at the bedside wearing a peculiar outfit with a hat. I must admit, I'm not brave enough to try communicating with these figures as others have. Instead, I feel a deep terror. On several occasions, I've jumped out of bed and run down the hall in a panic. Other times, my instinct is to grab my pillow and swing it at the figure. It's an automatic reaction, as ridiculous as it sounds. Just last night, I woke to see a man standing by the bed and instinctively launched into attack mode with my pillow. This morning, I found all the picture frames from my bedside table scattered on the floor from the chaos. These experiences have been happening since childhood and seem unrelated to any particular location. Wherever I live, the figures appear, yet my home always feels peaceful and not at all haunted. There's no discernible pattern to their visits, which makes them all the more perplexing. I've shared these experiences with a friend who analyzes dreams from a Jungian perspective. She suggests that these figures might represent aspects of myself that I am projecting and need to integrate. While I don't want to dismiss this idea, the beings feel entirely distinct from me. They don't feel like projections or symbols, they feel real. I continue to search for answers, but these nighttime visitors remain a profound mystery to me. In 1976, when I was 8 years old, my family moved to Colts Neck, New Jersey. My parents had a 6-bedroom colonial house built on an acre and a half of land. The homes in the area were relatively new, but Colts Neck itself had roots dating back to the 1700s. It was an exciting time for us, especially since we were a big family and the house had plenty of space. My 2 older brothers, Mike and Renee, were given the 2 bedrooms on the ground floor, which were connected to the garage wing. For the first year, everything seemed normal. Then strange things started happening, beginning with Mike's complaints about noises outside his bedroom window. At first, he said it sounded like bushes rustling in the wind, scraping against the siding and the glass. But there weren't any bushes or shrubs planted near the back of the house, which left my mom skeptical. Over time, the noises became more distinct, evolving into a soft thudding sound, followed by something sliding, almost like hay being dragged against a barn wall. Mike wasn't too bothered by the noises at first, but when his closet doors began opening on their own, It really scared him. He told my parents that he thought something was in the house, but they dismissed it as his imagination. My tough 17-year-old brother started sleeping with the lights and his TV on. Soon, other strange occurrences began. Items would disappear from where we left them and reappear in odd places. Car keys vanished from the table and turned up in the kitchen cabinets. Mike's watch went missing for 2 weeks before being found in the garage under a box of Christmas decorations. Even my grandmother's false teeth disappeared and were never found. No, she wasn't wearing them at the time. When Renee left for college, I sometimes stayed in his room because he had a great TV and stereo system. But the room often felt freezing, and I'd wake up to find the blankets piled on the floor at the foot of the bed. Despite this, I enjoyed the room, until Renee's girlfriend stayed over one weekend. The morning after her stay, she asked my dad if he had come into the room during the night. He said he hadn't, and Renee grew unusually quiet. She described hearing her name being called by a man's voice. When she answered, there was no reply. She assumed it was a dream and tried to go back to sleep, but the voice called her again. This time, she saw the figure of a tall, thin man standing over her. He had sharp features, wore a floppy-brimmed hat and a frock coat, and was illuminated by a faint bluish aura. He stood there briefly before walking to the foot of the bed and disappearing through the wall. Believing it to be a dream, she went back to sleep. As she recounted her experience, Renee admitted that the same thing had happened to him weeks before he left for college. He hadn't told anyone because he didn't want us to think he was crazy. His girlfriend was furious that he hadn't warned her. From that point on, nightlights became a permanent fixture in that bedroom. Not long after, my mom was in the kitchen when she saw a little girl in period clothing, complete with a bonnet, standing by the picture window. The girl vanished as soon as my mom saw her. Colts Neck has a long history, and our property was no exception. Phalanx Road, where our house stood, was a main thoroughfare for early settlers. Archaeologists often found old glass medicine bottles, farming tools, and remnants of homes nearby. In the woods behind the reservoir, there was even a grave monument, though its inscription and the name on it have faded from my memory. It felt oddly out of place, deep in the undeveloped woods. Could the man in the frock coat and the little girl have been spirits of a farmer and his daughter who once lived on our land? Could they have perished in one of the fires rumored to have occurred in the area? We'll never know for sure. In 1984, we moved to a house in Whippany that, thankfully, wasn't haunted. But I often wonder about the people who moved into our Colts Neck home after us. Have they experienced anything unusual? And what about my mom, who passed away in that house in 1983? Did she leave an impression behind? Living in that house opened my eyes to the mysteries of the world, things that we, in our human form, cannot fully understand or explain. Despite a paranormal experience as a kid, nothing else unusual happened to me until I was about 25. By then, I was a divorced mother of 2 young daughters and had taken a job at El Coyote in Netcong, New Jersey. The building, painted bright pink, has a long and storied history. Before it became El Coyote, it was 2 other restaurants, Club 21 and Nellie Burke's. When I started working there, no one mentioned anything about strange occurrences. No one warned me about the voices, the shadows, or the way your hair would stand on end when you went downstairs. I think they were waiting for me to experience it myself. My first encounter happened one night after closing. I was the last one to leave and had parked my car down the ramp behind the building. The kitchen was directly above where I was standing, and it was completely dark. As I unlocked my car, I heard pounding on the kitchen windows. Startled, I looked up, but the kitchen remained pitch black. My hands shook as I tried to start my car, and then I heard 3 more loud knocks. I couldn't bring myself to look up again. Instead, I jumped into my car and drove straight to the bar where my coworkers were meeting. When I arrived, Brenda immediately asked if I was okay. I must have looked pale because I had trouble explaining what had just happened. When I finally managed to tell them, they just smiled knowingly. "Coyote Ghost made contact?" one of them joked. Despite my fear, I was curious and wanted to learn more. I spoke with Bill, the head bartender, who shared his own experiences. He said it started with small things. hearing silverware jingling near table 40 or seeing shadows moving through the dining area. At first, he dismissed these occurrences, but then he saw something more concrete. One night, while cleaning up and watching TV after closing, he heard the front door click. The door wasn't visible from the bar, but the chandelier in the lobby cast shadows on the entryway wall when someone walks in. He saw a shadow and went to check, but no one was there. After searching the dining room and finding nothing, he returned to the lobby, and there it was. A man stood there, middle-aged, wearing a black and white striped sweater, with a close-cropped beard. Bill, a big, burly biker, admitted he screamed like a little girl. I couldn't help but laugh as he told me. I began having my own unsettling moments, like hearing my name called when no one was actually calling me. It wasn't just me. The entire staff had similar experiences. The voices, both male and female, seemed to know all of us by name. It became a common occurrence, but that didn't make it any less unnerving. The busboys refused to go downstairs alone, and for good reason. My nephew, who I suspect is sensitive to the paranormal, once saw a shadow casually leaning in a doorway downstairs, watching us as we retrieved supplies. He quit soon after. Attempts to use a Ouija board didn't help, and I wasn't keen on tangling with that anyway. Eventually, we decided to call in paranormal researchers. Before they arrived, a relative of one of the previous owners dined at the restaurant and shared a chilling story with our waitress, Lynn. She said the downstairs used to house a bar, just like the one upstairs. Her grandfather, who owned Nellie's, often closed alone and frequently called the police, convinced people were hiding downstairs. He'd hear bar stools scraping across the floor and bottles clinking, but every time he checked, the room was empty. When the paranormal researchers came, they initially found minimal activity. But during a follow-up investigation, the energy was much stronger. They identified several entities occupying the building. Photos, videos, and EVP, electronic voice phenomena, recordings from their investigation can be found on their website, tspeerghosts.com, under the Netcong, New Jersey section. If you search for El Coyote, you might find more details about what they discovered. Sadly, the owner of El Coyote passed away, though most of us still work there under new ownership. Strangely, the activity has quieted down since his passing. I keep suggesting renovations to see if that might stir up our friends again. We miss the ghosts, but if their silence means they've found peace, that's fine with me. Since El Coyote was visited by TSPRGHOSTS, we've had many guests come in, curious about our residence. Over time, you get used to sharing the stories of our experiences. Most people love hearing them and want to know more. But nothing prepared me for what a contractor and his wife shared with me after asking about our encounters. Just 2 towns over from us is Chester, New Jersey, a place steeped in history. Driving through it, you can feel the past in its well-preserved old buildings. Chester was originally established at the intersection of 2 major Lenape Indian trails that had been used for centuries before the town became official in 1799. In 1810, Zephaniah Drake and his son Jacob built the brick house. It served as a stagecoach stop during Chester's mining boom, providing a place for travelers and immigrants coming to work. Over the next century, as mining slowed, Chester became a quieter town. The brick house stopped operating as an inn and transitioned into a restaurant, eventually becoming the public house. The town filled with charm craft shops, Taylor's ice cream, antique stores, and Halloween parades. Recently, the public house had fallen into disrepair and was closed for about a year. That's where the contractor came in. While chatting with me and Billy, he danced around the subject before telling us his story. The new owners had purchased the building and were debating whether to restore or demolish it. The Historical Society pushed for preservation, and the contractor, along with his wife and an electrician, was brought in to assess whether it could be saved. One night, they went upstairs to the former guest rooms. As they explored, they uncovered old oil lamps, candle sconces, and a Bible inscribed with Zephaniah Drake's name. The rooms still held their beds and other remnants of the past. The contractor's wife even read a psalm from the Bible aloud, though I can't recall which one. But when they returned downstairs, they found the dining room in chaos. Tables had been overturned, chairs knocked over, silverware scattered everywhere. The doors were wide open, and the room was freezing cold. Despite the eerie experience, they continued working on the project. One late night, the contractor was alone, reviewing his notes, when he heard footsteps coming from upstairs. Curious, he went to investigate. But as he reached the stairs, something passed through him. He described it as feeling like being hit in the stomach with a bat, leaving him breathless. Along with the impact, he heard voices, a female pitch though no distinct words. The experience left him nauseous and shaken. That was enough for him to call it quits. Someone else eventually took over the restoration. The building stands today, now with a starker, more modern decor. The good news? The rooms upstairs have been reopened for guests. But the mysteries linger. Who were the Drakes? I've heard unsettling rumors about Jacob Drake, Zephaniah's son. Stories suggest he wasn't a kind man and had a disturbing penchant for young Lithuanian immigrant girls who worked for him. There are whispers of one dying under his employ, though I found no evidence to confirm it, despite researching local history. Could it be tied to the old Lenape trails or even burial grounds? Were there tragic deaths within the house's walls? I often wonder about the real stories behind these places. I'm planning to stay there soon, hoping to learn more firsthand. Maybe one day, my skeptical husband will experience something that changes his mind. When my grandfather returned home from World War II, he purchased land in Bound Brook, a small city in central New Jersey. He built a house on an empty lot that had once been home to an old barn. My grandfather tore down the barn, leaving only the stone basement, which he buried. The house was built in front of the barn's original location, and the buried basement became part of our backyard. The strange events began when I was 5. As a little girl, I was very attached to my mother and often slept in her bed. I frequently woke up during the night, thinking I heard noises. When I told my mother about them, she would reassure me, saying our house was old and the sounds were probably just the house settling. One night, I woke up again, this time to a strange, heavy footstep. Thinking it might be my grandfather coming upstairs, I sat up and looked toward the door to my mother's room. Instead, I saw a man standing in the doorway. He was dressed in overalls and a plain white shirt. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Then, in a clear, deep voice, he told me, "Get out." His eyes fixed on me intensely. I was terrified. Being a child, I decided the safest thing to do was hide under the covers. After a few moments, I peeked out, and he was gone. Still frightened, I woke my mother and told her everything I had seen. She dismissed it as a bad dream and told me to go back to sleep. Years later, when I was 16, I brought up the memory to my mother. At first, she seemed uncomfortable, but after some pressing, she shared her own experiences. Many nights, she said, she felt someone get into bed with her and hold her. Assuming it was me coming to her after a bad dream, she would turn over to check on me, only to find no one there. I asked if she thought I might have seen the same phantom bedmate, and she admitted she believed I had. She no longer thought it was just a bad dream. Before my grandfather passed away, I asked him about the ghost that both my mother and I had encountered. Although he wasn't a superstitious man, he didn't doubt our experiences. He told me that he often felt someone's presence while working in the backyard. When I was younger, too young to remember, I would often run to him crying, saying there was something scary in the backyard and refusing to go back there. That's when he told me about the barn and his belief that whatever we were experiencing had come from it. Even after all these years, I still remember waking up to strange noises at night and the uneasy feeling I had in the backyard. To this day, I hope that the people living in the house now aren't bothered by the same presence. And maybe, someday, whatever haunted that old barn will finally find peace. This story happened to my wife while we were living in an apartment complex in Maple Shade, New Jersey. One evening, she reluctantly shared an experience from the night before, something she couldn't explain and had been hesitant to talk about. She described having an incredibly vivid dream, as though she were witnessing someone's entire life through their eyes. It was like flipping through a photo album of an older Italian gentleman's memories. She saw and felt all the major milestones in his life. His first communion, graduations, first kisses, marriage, the births of children, and the losses of loved ones. All of this played out in her mind to the classic song Sea of Love. At the end of the dream, a voice told her, "I know she is very sick." Neither of us knows who or what that statement referred to. When she woke up, she noticed a faint smell of cigar smoke lingering in the apartment. I rarely smoke cigars, and when I do, it's never inside the apartment, so the smell didn't make sense. Our apartment was a small, street-level, one-bedroom unit. When you stepped out of the bedroom, the bathroom was to the left, and the living room/dining room was to the right. At night, a lamp post outside cast light through the gaps in our living room curtains and blinds, reflecting on one of the walls. This was a familiar sight whenever we walked into the living room at night. That night, as my wife left the bedroom, she saw the silhouette of a man on the living room wall where the light was reflected. What unsettled her was that the shadow didn't seem to come from an outside source. Instead, it felt as if the shadow was on the wall itself. Doubting what she was seeing, she turned her head toward the window to check for someone outside, perhaps a peeping Tom, but saw nothing. When she turned back to the shadowy figure, it was gone. Still uneasy, she ran to the window, pulled back the curtains and looked outside. No one was there. For the shadow she saw to appear as it did, someone would have had to be standing right against the window, or even inside the apartment. But there was no one. That shadow never appeared again. Later that summer, my wife's best friend's grandmother-in-law, Helen, passed away after being very sick for a long time. Helen's son, my wife's best friend's father-in-law, had been taking care of her in her final months. This got us thinking, could the dream and the shadow have been connected to Helen or someone associated with her? Helen's husband had passed long ago, but since we'd never seen photos of him, we couldn't confirm if the man in the dream or shadow could have been him. It's possible, but we might be reaching. My wife has also had other experiences with dreams. Her grandmother, who passed in 2003, occasionally visits her in dreams, often bringing a sense of comfort or connection. I've always believed in the paranormal, but I've never heard of anything quite like this. When I was in my 20s, going through a divorce, my kids and I moved back in with my mom. Since her house only had 2 bedrooms, I stayed in the semi-finished basement while the kids took the other bedroom. Not long after, she had a small bedroom built for me in the basement to give me some privacy. I've always been interested in ghosts and the paranormal, but the occult and anything related to demons terrified me. I avoided watching movies or shows about them, especially since basements often seem to play a role in horror films. One night, I was reading one of the Omen books, but it scared me so much I threw it across the room. I vowed never to read anything like that again, especially in my basement. I can't remember exactly how long after that night this happened, but it must have been a few weeks or more. One night, I woke up suddenly with an overwhelming feeling of pure evil in the room. It was as if the devil himself had entered. I couldn't see anything, but in my mind, I could vividly picture him. The sense of malice was so strong, it's hard to explain. It felt oppressive, like a suffocating presence. As soon as I felt whatever it was leave the room, I bolted upstairs to my mom's room. I woke her up and told her I had a bad dream because I didn't think she'd believe me if I said I felt the devil himself. I was shaking so hard, I couldn't calm down. I refused to go back to the basement that night. Instead, I slept on the couch in the living room. I found my old Bible, opened it to Psalm 23, read it out loud, and placed it over my heart until I eventually fell asleep. Looking back, I've wondered if it might have been sleep paralysis. But I could move, and I was certain I was awake. I didn't lose any time between the moment I felt the presence and when I ran out of the room. Still, who knows? Years later, now, as a born-again Christian, I've come to understand that there's good and evil in this world. I've had experiences with both. One memory that stands out is a conversation I had with my pastor about my fear of Satan. He told me that Satan isn't the terrifying figure often shown in movies. Instead, he's a deceiver, subtle, manipulative, and cunning. The pastor warned me to be more cautious of his trickery than his appearance. That night, feeling emboldened, I made a terrible mistake. On my way home, I taunted the devil. I told him I was wise to his tricks and couldn't be deceived. It was foolish and arrogant, and I would soon regret it. Later that night, an old boyfriend called me out of the blue. He was distraught, saying his wife had left him and he needed someone to talk to. Foolishly, I agreed to meet him, thinking I was doing a good deed by being there for a friend. But by the end of the night, he raped me. Afterward, he revealed that his wife hadn't left him. She was just out of town and would be back in a week. I was devastated. I realized then that my taunting had opened a door, giving Satan the opportunity to strike. He hadn't come at me as a terrifying figure. He'd used deception to lure me into a situation that shattered me. I've learned my lesson the hard way. My warning to anyone reading this is simple. Be careful with your words. Never taunt Satan or underestimate the power of his deceit. The Bible describes him as a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour, and I now understand the truth of that more than ever. I'm a 14-year-old living with my dad and his girlfriend. Over the years, my dad and I have moved around a lot, renting cheap old houses. Finally, he saved enough money for us to live in a decent home. Through all the moving, I've experienced some pretty strange things. Shadows in the corners, objects falling for no reason. Things I didn't want to talk about. My dad and I don't really communicate much, and I didn't want him to think I was making it up or being silly. We've been in our current house for 3 years. My dad met his girlfriend after we moved here, and I made some friends. For a while, I thought the weird occurrences were behind me, until last year. I still remember it clearly. My dad and his girlfriend were away for a week or two, leaving me home alone. At first, everything was fine. But as the days passed, strange things started happening again. It got so bad that I started sleeping with the lights on, even though I knew it would increase the electricity bill. Eventually, I decided to be brave and sleep with the lights off. That night, I went to bed with the lights off, determined to face my fear. Around midnight, maybe closer to 2 a.m., I woke up thirsty. I got up, went to the kitchen, turned on the light, opened the fridge, and grabbed a bottle of water. As I drank, I heard an odd noise. It sounded like someone washing clothes the old-fashioned way, scrubbing on a washboard. Curious but uneasy, I followed the noise. It grew louder as I approached the bathroom. When I peeked inside, there was nothing there. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was nothing, and went back to bed. But it didn't stop. The noise started again, and this time, I felt a deep chill settle over the room. I turned the lights on, hoping it would help, but then I heard something upstairs. Running footsteps. Panic set in. I thought it might be a robber. Grabbing a knife from the kitchen, I carefully crept up the stairs, trying to stay as silent as possible. At the top of the stairs, I heard a door close at the far end of the hall. My heart was racing as I approached the room. When I opened the door, I thought I saw someone crouched in the corner. Terrified, I flipped the light switch on, but no one was there. My fear overwhelmed me, and I bolted downstairs, dropping the knife in my haste. I turned on every light in the living room and tried to distract myself by turning on the TV. But the TV wouldn't work. I was too scared to do anything else, so I sat on the couch and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted and still shaken. I couldn't bring myself to go to school. When my dad called to check on me, I lied and said I was sick and might throw up. He didn't believe me but told me to stay home anyway. That night still haunts me. I haven't shared the full story with my dad. I don't think he'd believe me. But I know what I heard and saw, and I can't forget it. When I was younger, my aunt had an old Ouija board in her basement. I was always fascinated by the occult and the mysteries of the supernatural. So when my siblings and I went to her basement to pick out board games, she handed it to me with a smile and said, "Use it well." When I brought it home, my mom was less enthusiastic. She didn't want me scaring myself and insisting on sleeping in her bed, so she put the board away in the garage, where I wasn't allowed. A few years later, when I was old enough to explore the garage, I found it again. It was dusty and worn, the box torn and faded. Holding it gave me a strange sense of power, as if it held answers to the mysterious occurrences I had felt throughout my life. The first time I used it, I invited a few friends over to give ourselves a scare. We set it up on the living room floor and started asking questions. At first, nothing happened, but soon the planchette began to move. The board told us a little boy was communicating with us. Things were going smoothly until he suddenly became erratic, spelling out "mom" twice, followed by "help." We asked what was wrong, and the board replied, "Backyard, 700 swing." I had a swing set in the backyard, so we all gathered at the glass door to watch. When the clock struck 7 o'clock, one of the swings began moving rapidly, as if someone were using it. There was no wind, and no one was outside. We were terrified and didn't sleep that night. At the time, it seemed like the boy was harmless, but looking back, I wonder if he was being harassed by what he called the other. Years later, I brought the Ouija board to my ex-boyfriend's house to convince him of the supernatural. I had used the board countless times and always communicated with the same little boy, who no longer seemed as jumpy as he had been that first time. But something was different this time. We began as usual, asking if the boy was there. When he replied, we asked if anyone else was with him. He spelled out, "Yes." When we asked who it was, he replied, "Other." Curious but foolish, we asked if the other wanted to talk. The boy responded, "Yes." As soon as we allowed the other to communicate, the board began spelling, "Die, die, 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 you, die." I was horrified but continued. My ex asked if it was directed at him, and the board answered, "No." When I asked if it was aimed at me, it spelled, "Yes." Terrified, I forced the planchette over "goodbye" and threw the board across the room. Since that night, I felt a sinister presence in my house, especially near the top of the stairs by my mom's room. I don't know if it's connected to the other, but the feeling hasn't gone away. I would like to understand what happened and why, but I'm not sure how to find answers. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This is a recent event that happened in both New York and New Jersey on January 1st, 2009. My mother's best friend was gravely ill with lung cancer that had spread throughout her entire body, from her brain downward. When her son told me the news, I was devastated. On Sunday, we traveled to New York to see her, but we were too late. As soon as the nurse said, "I'm sorry," I broke down in tears. I ran to the bathroom and continued crying uncontrollably. About 10 minutes later, my father knocked on the door and told me that her daughter had arrived. I could barely bring myself to move. When I opened the bathroom door and saw her body lying there, I broke down again. That's when something strange happened. I heard her voice softly calling my name. At first, I thought it was her daughter, but as I focused on the sound, I realized it was unmistakably her voice. She was saying my name, stretching it out slowly, "Genia Sisica." I froze, overwhelmed with emotion. She was gone, and yet I could hear her calling me. I kept thinking, she knows I'm here. She was like an aunt to me and was supposed to be my godmother, though she wasn't officially chosen. Still, I had always considered her my aunt, and I think she knew how much she meant to me. After a while, the voice stopped. I comforted her daughter as much as I could, and eventually we left. On the ride home, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I cried the entire way. When we got home, I went straight to my room and turned on my computer. Suddenly, my old-fashioned alarm clock started ringing. This clock has a small metal piece that swings back and forth, making a bell sound when the alarm is set. But this time, the metal piece was moving very slowly, creating a soft, unusual ringing. Shocked and a little scared, I ran downstairs to my mom, but at the same time, I felt an unexpected happiness. I hugged her tightly and said, "Mom, she got her wings. She's okay now." My mom gave me a puzzled look, so I explained what my dad had once told me. Every time a bell rings, an angel gets their wings. I experienced it again on January 19th, 2009. I was silently crying to myself, thinking, I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell her how much she meant to me or how much I loved her. As I cried, The alarm clock began to ring slowly again, just like before. This time, I felt as though she was telling me, "Don't cry. I'm not in pain anymore. I'll watch over my family and you." It's still hard to cope with her loss, but moments like these give me comfort. I believe she's watching over me and that she found peace. So, if you ever lose someone you love deeply, listen for the bells. It might be their way of letting you know they're okay. Oh. This is an experience I had when I was 11 years old. Even though I was young, I'm absolutely sure about what happened that night. Felt real, terrifyingly real. At the time, my family lived in a two-story house on Murray Hill Drive. The house, which resembled a barn, had a bit of a history. An old man and his wife had lived there for many years before tragically losing their lives in a car crash. My sister and I, being naturally superstitious, never liked the house from the start. It was set off a quiet road with about 5 acres of woods behind it, which only added to its eerie vibe. That night, around 9 p.m., I was getting ready for bed. On a whim, I decided to look outside to see if there were any stars. I pulled back my curtains and peered out into the darkness. At first, all I saw was pitch black, except for 2 glowing ovals that seemed to reflect light. My heart stopped as I realized I was staring at a face in my window. But before I could scream, I recognized it was just my cat, Tunsis or Toonie, as we like to call him. Relieved and annoyed, I opened the window to let him in, muttering under my breath. Just as I closed the window, the motion sensor lights in the backyard flickered on. I instinctively glanced toward the fence. At first, there was nothing, so I went back to shutting the window. But then I saw him, a man standing in the woods. He was dressed in dark clothing, and I couldn't make out his face. As soon as I registered his presence, he turned and darted back into the darkness, vanishing among the trees. My 11-year-old self was already on edge, and this sent my fear into overdrive. I tried to distract myself, pulling clothes out of my dresser for the next day. That's when the bottom drawer suddenly fell off and hit my foot. The impact felt like a hand grabbing me, and I screamed in terror. Without thinking, I bolted down the hallway into my sister's room. She screamed too. She was just as easily scared as I was. After calming down, she explained that the dresser drawer was old and loose, and that's why it had fallen off. But I wasn't convinced. Deep down, I was certain something had made it happen. Around 9:45, I climbed into bed, still rattled. At some point, I managed to fall asleep, but my rest didn't last long. I woke up a few hours later to a whisper. The sound came from the corner of my room, the same corner with the window. Frozen in fear, I peeked over the edge of my blanket. My curtains suddenly lifted, swirling like a dress in motion, before slowly settling back down. And then, in its place, stood the man from the woods. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My head rested on the pillow, and I shut my eyes tightly, hoping I was imagining things. But the whisper came again, sending chills through me. Desperate to know the time, I glanced at my clock. It was 11:56 p.m. For some reason, I thought I'd be safe if it was past midnight, but it wasn't. I opened my eyes again, and he was still there, motionless like a coat hanging in the closet. The door was closer to him than to me. There was no chance of running. In my panic, I said a silent prayer, hoping he was a demon and that my prayer would drive him away. As I prayed, the figure began to move along the wall near the window. He paused, whispered one last time, and then I blacked out. The next thing I remember was my mother calling me to get ready for school. I shot up in bed, my eyes darting to the corner of the room. He was gone. Cautiously, I walked over to inspect the spot where he had stood. Everything seemed normal except for one chilling detail. On the wall, in what looked like black ink, was a symbol. It resembled a snake. That symbol is still there to this day. I've never touched it, and I doubt I ever will. My father's side of the family was always a bit of a mess. Divorces, lawsuits, gang problems, you name it. Because of that, we rarely visited them. Still, I was close to 3 of my cousins. Joey, the oldest, a year older than me, and I was 8 at the time, Amy, 6, and Emily, 4. They lived on the second floor of a 3-story building. which gave them a great view of the neighborhood. Even though Joey was closer to my age, I preferred hanging out with Emily. Amy and Emily shared a room, and in their room was a large closet where they kept their toys and clothes. The closet also had a window, though it was stuck shut and couldn't be opened. Every time I visited their home, I felt a strange sense of gloom. I couldn't explain why. My Aunt Mary, not the one who gave me the doll, was a neat freak, and the house was always spotless. But no matter how clean it was, there was something unsettling about it, especially that closet. Emily and Amy's toys would always end up scattered across the floor, even when no one was in the house. My cousins and I would often play in the backyard with our grandma, and the doors would be locked. Yet somehow the toys would still end up all over the room. Aunt Mary always blamed the kids and would put them in timeout for not cleaning up. My cousins insisted, "It wasn't us," and I backed them up because I was with them when it happened. But Aunt Mary never believed us. "Don't make excuses for them," she told me. There was something off about that closet. Being near it gave me this heavy, negative feeling, like I was being watched. Joey and Amy didn't seem to notice anything unusual, but Emily did. She told me she thought there was something in there. She called it sombra, which means shadow in Spanish. She said it made her feel uneasy, like it was always watching her. She only ever told her siblings and me about it. None of the adults took her seriously, at least not at first. That changed one night when we were all at their house watching a movie. Amy got cold, so Aunt Mary went to the closet to grab her a sweater. Moments later, she came running out, shrieking. Her face was pale as a sheet, and she looked terrified. When we asked what happened, this is what she told us. "I went in to grab a sweater, and it was freezing inside, even though the window was shut. Then I started feeling sick, and when I looked at the wall, I saw a shadow moving. It was wide, with a lopsided, pointed head and long, crooked arms. After that, my family didn't visit them for 4 years. When I finally went back at age 12, I found out their family had been through a lot. Things had gotten so bad that my aunt and uncle ended up divorcing. Aunt Mary took all the furniture and left, and she didn't want custody of the kids. Emily had changed too. She was quiet and withdrawn at school. When I asked her why, she simply said, "Because." But what struck me most was when she said, "I don't have a mom because of sombra." This started about 2 years ago. Looking back, I now understand that I come from a family of what you might call ghost magnets. It wasn't until about a year and a half ago that I learned my grandmothers on my father's side were Santeria witches, and my mother has always been a spiritual magnet. From a young age, I would catch glimpses of the departed, like flashes of images in my mind, or hear faint whispers and footsteps. It always seemed to depend on the house or the time. My high school years were particularly turbulent. I'm not talking about the usual "no one understands me" kind of drama. I had moved past that by 7th grade. What I went through was deeper. Battling bulimia, surviving a suicide attempt, and moving from a house with my verbally abusive stepfather and gossiping stepfamily to living with my dad. The house I moved into was built from scratch when I was 10, and I had no idea what was there before or who might have lived on that land. In August of 2007, during my sophomore year, a year filled with my personal demons, I first saw him. At first, I thought it was my stepmom. They were about the same height and both had dark hair. But when I turned to speak to who I thought was her, I realized he was entirely different. He was about 5 feet 8 inches, with dark, straight hair that fell to his shoulders, always covering the left side, my right, of his face. He wore an off-white, long-sleeved shirt and beige trousers. I couldn't see his eyes, but it felt like we locked gazes for what seemed like an hour. We stood there at opposite ends of the hall, staring at each other. Then, just as I was about to speak, he turned and walked into my baby brother's room. In shock, I followed him, only to find the room empty, except for a floor scattered with toys. For about a year, this became a pattern. I would enter a room, and he'd be there, standing silently in a corner. He'd notice me, and we'd stare at each other before he left. Sometimes, I thought he looked at me with disgust, but I never felt a negative energy from him. In fact, he felt more like an older brother I'd never had, a silent presence watching over me. Once, I used a Ouija board in the house and asked for his name. He seemed to toggle between Keith and Kenneth. I still wonder if there were two spirits communicating or if his name simply started with a K. Eventually, we moved out of that house because of issues with the in-laws who lived below us. At the new house, he still appeared occasionally. I'd catch him out of the corner of my eye, but the encounters became less frequent. What's bothering me now is that I'm going through an even harder time in my life. Almost a year ago, I was sexually assaulted during an abusive relationship with my ex. I'm in the process of filing a complaint, and it feels like I'm drowning in loneliness. It's similar to how I felt before he first appeared, but now he's not here. I miss him. I wonder why he doesn't visit me anymore. For a long time, I thought he might be my guardian angel, but now that he's gone when I need him the most, I'm questioning everything. I don't think he was tied to the old house. He followed me to the new one. Yet I haven't seen him since last summer. Does anyone have any idea what this could mean? Or what kind of spirit he might be? I know he's not related to me. He doesn't resemble anyone in my family, immediate or otherwise. Still, I wish I could understand why he was there, and why he isn't now. My story is unusual, mostly because I don't fear the events that have happened. I truly believe there's a spirit of a young boy, about 10 or 12 years old, living in my room, specifically connected to my closet and basement. What's strange is that I didn't notice his presence until 11 years after moving into this house with my mom. My first experience with this boy happened when I was 16 years old, on a hot summer day during a thunderstorm. Terrified of the thunder, I grabbed a blanket and pillow and ran into my walk-in closet, closing the door behind me. As I lay there trying to calm myself, I suddenly felt a presence in the closet. It didn't feel threatening. If anything, it felt like someone quietly sitting beside me, offering awkward comfort. When the storm ended, the feeling disappeared. The activity really picked up when I was 17. During a Halloween sleepover, my friends and I were getting ready for bed in my room. Two friends were already asleep, and Justine, one of my other friends, was lying on her back behind me. My walk-in closet, which was slightly ajar, was to my right. All the windows were closed, and my door was shut tightly. Out of nowhere, Justine let out a squeak. When I asked her what was wrong, she muttered that she had seen my closet door moving back and forth, as though someone inside was pushing it in frustration. Skeptical, I turned to look, and she was right. The door had shifted to a new angle. A few hours later, I woke up to a loud noise. The TV was on at full volume, even though I was sure I had turned it off. As I reached for the remote to turn it off, the small nightlight I'd left on for my friend Jackie began to flicker on and off for about a minute. Jackie woke up and asked why it was doing that. I could only reply, I don't know. For months after the party, I began to feel like I was being watched. It wasn't threatening, though. It felt more like someone was curiously observing me, trying to figure out what I was doing. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a cold, small hand brush against my hair. It felt like it was made of ice and only lingered for a moment. Over the next few nights, I felt a presence sitting on my bed, touching my hands, cheeks, thighs, or hair. Once, I even thought I felt a small figure lying beside me in bed, though I'm unsure if that was a dream or reality. The first time I felt genuinely creeped out was when I was home alone while my mom and stepdad were out to dinner. I was working on a sketch and kept running back and forth to get supplies. At one point, as I reached for an ink pen, I felt a soft pressure near my ear, as though someone's lips were barely touching it. Then, I heard a faint whisper, a boy's voice. I couldn't make out exactly what he said, but it sounded like a giggle or a quick, "What are you doing?" The experience left me shaken, and I called out to see if anyone was there. Of course, no one responded. From then on, I was certain there was a spirit in my room, and I began calling him Derek. A couple of months ago, I finally saw him. I was chatting with friends on my computer while listening to music when something caught my eye near the TV. My heart nearly stopped. Peeking out from my closet was a young boy, around 12 years old, dressed in what looked like Victorian or 1920s style clothing. His hair was dark, and where his eyes should have been, there were only shadowy patches. He seemed curious, like he was watching me. I froze, unable to look away. When I finally glanced back at the closet, he was gone. Moments later, the TV flickered. A week after that, I tried ghostwriting, a technique a psychic friend had suggested. I wrote questions on paper and waited for answers. The responses were brief but startling. 1. Are you here? Yes, I am. 2. Do you like me? Yes. 3. Do you know your name? I don't remember. 4. How old are you? I don't know. 5. Do you have a message for me? I love you. That last answer caught me off guard. It was blunt and simple, and it left me feeling both flattered and uneasy. I glanced up from the paper and saw him again. This time, he was peeking from the twin bed across the room, watching me as I wrote. Instead of feeling afraid, I smiled and waved at him. With that, he disappeared. Since then, I haven't seen him, but I still feel his presence. It's as though he's always watching me. What unsettles me is that he doesn't seem to like my friends. Justine and Sarah, who were at the Halloween sleepover, still feel uncomfortable in my room. They say they feel watched, especially near the closet, as if someone is impatiently waiting for them to leave. There was one incident in the basement that completely terrified Justine. She went down to grab something and, curious, asked, "If you're here, give me a sign." Almost immediately, she felt a heavy presence push against her, like someone glaring silently at her, demanding she leave. She bolted upstairs, her eyes wide with fear. Even as I type this, I feel like Derek might be peeking over my shoulder, watching me. Perhaps it's paranoia after all that's happened, but I know he's still here. Derek doesn't seem to like anyone who takes my attention away from him, and I wonder why he feels so attached to me. Why does he say he loves me? Could I remind him of someone he cared for in life? About 7 years ago, I started having visions of my girlfriend's death. It all began after my first girlfriend took her own life. The visions came immediately after the incident, haunting me in a way I could never have imagined. It was one of the hardest days of my life. She died because of me, or at least that's how I've always felt. I wasn't there for her when she needed me most. Before this tragedy, everything between us was perfect. We spent all our time together, sharing moments that felt magical. Even our first time making love was special. But everything changed in an instant. I was overwhelmed with work and school, and I had to move. She was the kind of person who never missed a day of school, so when she didn't show up one day, I knew something was wrong. I left school early, my heart pounding with worry, and went straight to her house. When I got there, the scene was devastating. Medics and police were everywhere. Her parents were sobbing uncontrollably over their only daughter. The police told me she had taken her own life, leaving behind a suicide note. The note said she could no longer live her life the way she used to, and it mentioned me. To everyone else, the message was vague, but I understood it completely. It said, "My darling, you let me go." She was right. I had let her go. That Christmas Eve was the darkest day of my life. That night, as I tried to sleep, my memories of her sweet and loving nature were shattered. I fell asleep quickly, but in the darkness, I felt something watching me. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then it took form. It was her, or at least something that looked like her. Her figure emerged from the shadows, but her presence was terrifying. I remembered hearing that those who take their own lives go to a dark place, and in that moment, I was convinced she had become a demon. She stared at me with dark, empty eyes and said in a voice that chilled me to my core, "I'm going to eat your flesh slowly, then save your soul for my master." My heart sank. This couldn't be her. The woman I loved would never say such things. I ran past her, straight into the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I convinced myself it was just a bad dream. When I returned to my room, everything seemed normal. I muttered to myself, "It's friggin' Christmas. Can't they haunt me on Halloween instead?" I tried to distract myself by turning on the TV. There wasn't much to watch, but I settled on something random to ease my nerves. An hour later, I climbed back into bed, feeling a bit calmer. But as I lay down and turned on my side, there she was again, staring straight at me. Her black eyes and twisted smile were horrifying. She kissed me and whispered, "You're going to hell with me. We'll be together for eternity." I panicked and cursed at her, trying to push her away. She became furious, throwing me out of bed. Then, with a twisted smile, she spread her legs and taunted me, asking me to be with her like before. Summoning all my courage, I shouted, "Go to hell!" She sneered and said, "Try and stop me." I ran to the bathroom, filled a cup with water, and prayed over it. She begged me to stop as I returned to the room, but I didn't. I told her, "I love you," and poured the water. Instantly, she vanished. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat. It had been a dream, or so I thought. It felt like a battle between good and evil, but it didn't end there. Half asleep again, I saw her one more time. This time, her presence was different. Peaceful. She said softly, "I still love you." I whispered back, "I love you too." The visions I had during that time revealed how she ended her life. I won't go into detail, it's too painful to share. But I know she isn't in hell or heaven. Every Christmas Eve, she finds a way to say hello. I've learned to move on with my life, and I believe she has finally found peace. Even so, this story will always remain with me. When I was growing up, my family and I lived in an old Victorian-style mansion in New Jersey, a house that looked like a small castle. While it was unique and even beautiful in its own way, there were dark and inexplicable experiences that have stayed with me, etched into my memory. As a child, I was often scared at night like most kids, but it felt different in that house. I'd break out into sweats, lying there, waiting for something to happen. I'd see shadowy figures, what I can only describe as shadow people, moving through the walls and rooms. They weren't just shadows. They resembled human shapes, materializing and fading out of existence as if they belonged to another dimension. The most terrifying incident happened when I was watching one of these shadow figures. I stared at it for several minutes, frozen, when suddenly there was a flash of light and I felt a sharp smack to my face. I hit the floor, dazed and panicked, before scrambling back into bed, throwing the covers over me, and desperately trying to wake my brother. I was very young, but I'll never forget it. That moment has stayed with me, clear as day. Years later, as an adult, I had another unexplainable encounter. My wife and I were staying with her parents after moving to Pennsylvania. One evening, my wife, her mother, and I were talking about the baby we were expecting in a few months when something bizarre happened. In the kitchen, a set of glass bowls, stacked neatly within each other inside the cabinet, suddenly shattered. The bowls didn't fall and nothing fell on them. It was as if some unseen force caused them to explode. Glass fragments scattered across the kitchen and even down the steps into the foyer. To this day, no one has an explanation, and her mother still talks about it, baffled by how it could have happened. Not long after our son was born, we experienced another incident while living in her parents' basement. It was the early hours of the morning, around 2:30 a.m., when I woke up feeling a heavy, dark presence in the room. It's hard to describe, but it felt suffocating, like something silent and foreboding had entered the space. Without realizing it, my wife had woken up too and wrapped her arms around me, whispering that she was scared. That's when we both heard it, the sound of the doorknob turning. It rattled as though someone was trying to get in. We always kept the door locked for privacy, especially since her father sometimes stayed downstairs to watch TV, but he was working the night shift that evening. Just as suddenly as it started, the rattling stopped. I nervously told my wife to check it out, half joking but too scared to move myself. She reluctantly got up, but there was no one there. No sign of an intruder. We couldn't explain what had just happened. A few years later, after we had bought our first house, I had another disturbing experience. I was 22, and this incident happened within the first 2 years of living there. It was between 3 and 4 a.m. when I had the worst nightmare I've ever experienced. In the dream, someone broke into our home and killed me and my family. The dread was overwhelming. It felt so real. I woke up, heart pounding, only to hear my 2-year-old son screaming at the top of his lungs. My wife and I rushed to his room, scooped him up, and calmed him down. Everything seemed fine after that, so I tried to go back to sleep before work. While I was asleep, my wife decided to take our son to the store to pick up some essentials. She backed out of the driveway and drove less than 50 yards before crashing the car. Somehow, the vehicle flipped over, trapping her and our son upside down inside. A neighbor, who hadn't seen the crash but heard the impact, rushed to help. Thankfully, they were both unharmed, but the scene was shocking. When I ran outside and saw her car upside down just a few houses away, I couldn't believe it. The accident made no sense, the road was clear, and there was nothing obvious that could have caused it. Even the police seemed at a loss and conducted only a brief investigation. To this day, I wonder, if whatever force woke me and my son hadn't done so, would the accident have still happened? Or could it have been worse? These experiences have left me with more questions than answers, but one thing is certain. They've shaped my understanding of the unseen. This happened to me about 2 years ago and to my wife twice, once last year and again just the other day. One morning, after dropping my wife off at work, I came home and went to bed. I was sleeping in our bedroom upstairs, the only room on that floor, while the other 3 bedrooms are downstairs. Around 9 or 10 a.m., I was abruptly awakened by the sensation of something being thrown behind me on the bed. It felt and sounded like a pillow hitting the mattress. I'm a side sleeper, and without looking behind me, I immediately noticed that the bedroom door was still closed and locked, meaning I was alone. I lay there, puzzled but not alarmed, until suddenly I felt a heavy weight climb onto the bed. It was as if someone had crawled onto the mattress and lay down right behind me. I felt the mattress sag with the weight, a Tempur-Pedic mattress no less, which usually doesn't transfer motion like that. I tried to move, but I was frozen in place. My eyes darted around to make sure I was awake, but lying on my side, I couldn't see what was behind me. After about a minute or two, I finally managed to move my feet. Gathering my courage, I got up and turned to look behind me. Nothing. No pillow, no sign of anything. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination and decided not to tell my wife or anyone else about the experience. A few months later, my wife and I had a minor argument, and I decided to sleep on the couch for a couple of nights. During this time, she stayed in the upstairs bedroom alone. A couple of days later, she told me she'd had a strange experience. She described feeling exactly what I had felt. Something climbing onto the bed and lying down behind her. Still hesitant to share my own experience, I tried to convince her it was just a dream, though deep down I knew something unusual was going on. I reasoned with her and she let it go. But things didn't stop there. 2 days ago, it happened again. My wife had been staying home alone since losing her job last year. Most days, she stays up late on Facebook and other games, wakes up early to get the kids ready, and takes naps when the house is quiet. That morning, I left her lying in bed in our downstairs bedroom, which we moved into last year to save on heating costs. I noticed she seemed unusually tired. Later in the day, she called me, asking when I'd be home. I could hear something odd in her voice, but she didn't explain. When I arrived that evening, she immediately pulled me aside into my office room. Her voice was shaken as she recounted what had happened. She told me that while lying in bed, she felt something climb onto the mattress from the foot of the bed and lie down behind her. This time, the movement was much more aggressive, almost as if someone was deliberately pushing down on the mattress. Frozen with fear, she couldn't turn around, but she managed to kick her feet. Each time she kicked, the pushing would stop momentarily, only to start up again. She described it as feeling like someone was moving intensely, almost like they were having sex beside her. Finally, she mustered the courage to get up and look. She found nothing behind her. Panicked, she opened all the window blinds and the door, then stayed in my office until the kids came home. When she finished telling me, I finally admitted my own experience from 2 years ago. She looked relieved, knowing she wasn't imagining things. We both decided not to tell the kids, not wanting to scare them in their own home. But even now, we can't shake the unsettling feeling that something unexplainable is happening in our house. For years ago, I lost a friend in a terrible car crash. This friend was a Satanist, deeply fascinated by the black arts. and he often shared his interests with me. What I didn't realize until recently is that, before he died, he placed a curse on me. I know this because he told me himself, after he had already passed away. He had spent years studying the black arts, but claimed he'd never tried any of his spells on someone else. He told me he wanted to test his abilities on a Christian like me. I didn't believe him at the time. He was my friend, and I thought he was just joking. But he explained in detail what he had done. Lighting candles, drawing a pentagram on the floor, and chanting my name in Latin from some ancient spellbook. His goal was to see if I would start having visions of the dead. Instead, he chanted the wrong spell, and I began hearing demonic voices. In the first year after the curse, I went to church to seek help. Surrounded by prayer and positivity, I started to feel hopeful, as though the curse might be weakening. But one day, something happened that shook me to my core. While sitting in the pews, I began to feel lightheaded and drowsy. The church seemed to grow dimmer around me. When I turned toward the aisle, I saw her. A little girl drenched in blood. Seeing the dead is not new to me. I've always had this ability, though I can't control it. It's like a switch that's always on, even in my dreams. But seeing her in church was different. She walked slowly down the aisle, and when I blinked, she disappeared, only to reappear moments later, repeating the same path. This time, I tried to call out to her, but my voice was drowned by the joyous music of the congregation. She reached the altar, knelt before the pastor, and screamed, though no one but me seemed to notice. Then the pastor spoke. He told the congregation that there was something negative in the church. Some people laughed nervously, but he was deadly serious. Suddenly, a cold sensation swept through the room, and I saw them. Others, like the girl. They looked human but were undeniably dead. A procession of spirits marched toward the altar. I was certain no one else could see them. The pastor said demons could only enter the church if someone invited them in. I froze in fear, realizing it was probably me they had followed. Embarrassed and terrified, I left quietly, slipping out from the third to last row. But as I exited, the spirits turned their attention to me. Their cold, unrelenting eyes bore into me, grinning as though they knew something I didn't. They didn't follow me out but stayed in the church, watching me leave. Even there, I knew I wasn't safe. I've tried everything to rid myself of this curse. Prayer, medication, anything I thought could help, but nothing works. The person who cursed me is dead, and only the caster can lift the spell. So now, I'm trapped, constantly aware of the demons that linger near me. They don't attack me, but they're always there, a silent reminder that my soul is marked. The only thing that seems to help, even temporarily, is baptism. I tried it once, and the demons retreated for a short time. I also wear a cross necklace for protection, and it helps push them away, but it's never permanent. They always come back. I wish for a normal life every day. Believe me, this is no joke. I've seen what waits for us after death, and it follows me everywhere I go. The demons know my soul is damned, and so do I. I'm 55, and so is my wife, Alice. While I've always been skeptical of the paranormal, what I've documented over the past few years has made me question everything. What follows is a log I began in December 2009, as the strange events in our home increased in frequency. These occurrences were witnessed not only by me but also by my wife, stepchildren, and even guests. Initially, I dismissed many incidents as coincidental, but over time the pattern became undeniable. It all started with small, strange events that I tried to rationalize. About a year ago, I was heading to work early one morning around 5 a.m. Just as I reached the back door, I felt an icy blast of air on my neck. Turning around, I saw the refrigerator door cracked open about 2 inches. Odd, considering the fridge was about 20 feet away, separated by a partition wall. At other times, I would hear voices in the living room, indistinct conversations as though people were talking. Alice experienced this as well but described it differently. She said it sounded like 2 or 3 women arguing, and it happened more than once. She felt certain they were always fighting. One particularly unnerving incident occurred after I returned home from visiting my father. I'd been gone for 2 days, and when I arrived, The front door was wide open. We never used the front door, only the back, and I couldn't explain how it had been left that way. Things intensified in late December 2009. Alice's son Jonathan, visiting from Brazil, had a terrifying experience in the middle of the night. He woke up screaming, saying he had seen a black figure in his bedroom and felt intense pressure inside his body. Jonathan is 18 and 6 feet tall, but whatever he experienced left him so shaken that we had to send him to stay with Alice's daughter in Allentown. Not long after, I noticed strange activity near the upstairs hallway window. One morning, I found it wide open. I closed and locked it, but when I checked again the next day, it was unlocked. Around this same time, we began hearing knocks at the front door late at night. Twice, I opened the door only to find no one there. Alice reported even more unsettling occurrences. One morning, while making the bed, she saw 2 shadows enter the room and run into the closet. A few nights later, a vase inexplicably fell off the dresser while we were sleeping. Another time, friends of ours, Stacy and Jan, stopped by to turn off the heat while we were away for the weekend. Stacy showed Jan the Christmas decorations by the fireplace. When we returned home on Monday, we found the fireplace lit, even though no one had touched it. Alice also began hearing knocks inside the house. Once, she heard 2 distinct taps on the wall between the kitchen and the laundry room. Another time, she was so frightened by footsteps on the stairs and an open basement door that she called the police. The basement door had been closed when I left for work that morning. It would have been impossible for me to pass through the hallway without shutting it. Other inexplicable phenomena involved objects moving on their own. Alice discovered 2 porcelain dolls from the spare bedroom shelf placed neatly on the floor, unbroken. On another occasion, a small jewelry box shaped like an Easter egg was found several feet from its original position on the dresser, upright and intact. Days later, we heard a loud noise and discovered the same jewelry box on the floor again, this time with its hinge broken, lying 6 to 7 feet from where it had been. Given the distance, it couldn't have simply fallen or rolled. These events escalated rapidly, with no clear explanation. One particularly alarming day, Alice opened the back door and heard a loud pop in the living room. Despite searching the entire house, she found nothing to explain the noise. Even now, I don't know what to make of these events. They've left us unsettled, questioning what might be lurking in our home. Whether paranormal or otherwise, these occurrences have been impossible to ignore. While I still hold on to some skepticism, the experiences have made me wonder if there's more to our world than meets the eye. For 38 years, I was a firm skeptic of the paranormal. I had never experienced anything remotely unexplainable until 2007. That year, my father passed away in December, and about 10 days after his passing, I had my first encounter with something I couldn't explain. It happened late at night. I was asleep when I was awoken by a strong, unmistakable scent of bourbon. My father's drink of choice. I don't drink bourbon, nor do I keep it in my home. Yet, the smell was so vivid it lingered throughout the night. At first, I dismissed it, groggily thinking I was imagining things. But as the night went on and I woke up several times, the scent remained consistent. By the 3rd or 4th time, I was more alert and began to investigate. The smell was localized entirely in my bedroom. When I stepped outside the room, it was gone. Inside, it permeated every corner equally, with no clear source. After more than 10 interruptions to my sleep, it dawned on me. What if this was my father? Maybe it was his way of saying goodbye, a reminder that he was still around. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, I said aloud, "I smell it. I know it's you." After that, I rolled over and fell asleep. When I woke up later, the scent was gone. This experience marked the first time I seriously entertained the idea of the paranormal, and it opened the door to more questions than answers. Since then, I've had several strange occurrences. While some can be logically explained, they still leave me unsettled. I'd like to share 3 that stand out the most. The first happened at home, a couple of months after my father's passing. My routine when I get home from work is simple. I walk into my computer area, empty the contents of my pockets onto the desk. My phone, keys, wallet, and sometimes loose change, and then change into comfortable clothes. One evening, after following this routine, I sat at my desk to check emails, browse the web, and play a few games. About an hour later, I stood up and noticed something odd. One of the coins I had emptied from my pocket, a quarter, was standing upright on its edge. I froze, trying to make sense of it. The desk hadn't vibrated, and I couldn't figure out how it hadn't toppled over during the time I'd been sitting there. What unsettled me more was the way I always empty my pockets. I keep the coins in a closed fist, let them drop onto the desk, and press my hand down to keep them from scattering. There's no way a coin could have landed on its edge from that motion. I tried to recreate the event but couldn't. 2 days later, I encountered something equally baffling. After returning home from the gym, I went to take some Aleve for muscle soreness. I searched my medicine cabinet, as well as a larger cabinet my dad had made, but couldn't find it. I moved things around and even checked the sink area and window ledge. The Aleve was nowhere to be found. Frustrated, I settled for Tylenol and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and found the Aleve bottle sitting on the edge of my tiny vanity, in plain sight. There's barely enough room for a bottle of liquid soap on that surface, so there's no way it could have been there the whole time. I replayed the sequence of events in my head, convinced I hadn't taken it out the night before. Yet there it was. The most bizarre experience happened at work. I'm a teacher in central New Jersey, and every year, one of our senior staff members gives a Holocaust presentation to the 5th graders. It's a toned-down version of her family's story, accompanied by clips from Schindler's List. As the technology teacher, I'm tasked with setting up the audio and video equipment. After the clips are finished, I disassemble the setup and return the equipment to the proper classroom. On one occasion, after finishing my task, I passed the assembly room again but didn't go back in. I've heard the presentation many times and find it emotionally overwhelming. Instead, I headed toward the stairwell to return to my classroom. As I approached the double doors leading to the stairs, I heard a child sobbing. It wasn't a cry of pain but of deep sorrow and anguish. Concerned, I opened the doors and followed the sound, which seemed to come from below me. I hurried down the steps to the landing, but as I reached it, the sobbing stopped abruptly. The stairwell was silent. I checked the emergency exit behind the stairwell, thinking a child might be hiding there, but no one was present. I also checked the doors leading to the first-floor hallway. These doors are loud when opened, with handles that make a distinct clank, but I hadn't heard them move. I walked into the hallway and saw 2 teachers chatting and the receptionist sitting at her desk. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. The next day, I asked the teacher who gave the presentation if any students had left upset. She said no. To this day, I can't explain what I heard. These experiences leave me wondering, am I noticing more because I've become open to the idea of the paranormal? Or are these events simply coincidences that my mind wants to connect? Whatever the answer, they've changed the way I see the world. They've also sparked meaningful conversations with my sister, who's had her own strange experiences since our father's passing. If she allows, I'd love to share her stories with this supportive community in the future. My husband works as a maintenance manager in an old mill building constructed in 1890. Over the years, the building has been used for various purposes, including the textile industry and the production of fire engines and rifles. Today, it serves as an educational facility. The building's age and history make it fascinating, but what's even more intriguing are the stories of hauntings that circulate among those who work there. My husband told me from the start that the building was haunted. His first experience happened during a late-night shift when he was covering for a janitor on vacation. It was around 3 a.m. on a Monday morning, and the building was completely empty except for him. While cleaning bathrooms on the 3rd floor, he felt an unexplainable discomfort. As he walked toward some nearby offices, he heard a giggle. It froze him in his tracks. He paused, listened, and heard nothing further. He tried to move again, but this time there were 2 distinct voices laughing, both sounding like small children. Chilled to the bone, he decided to move to another part of the building until daylight. Later that morning, when he returned to the area, the warm sunlight made it feel less menacing. That's when he noticed pictures on the wall near where he had heard the laughter. Two photos caught his attention. Portraits of sisters dressed in Victorian-era clothing. Though the women in the photos were adults, the coincidence sent a shiver down his spine. When the janitor returned to work the following week, my husband asked him if he had ever experienced anything unusual. The janitor casually replied, "You mean my girls?" He explained that while the building felt creepy at night, nothing harmful ever happened, so he didn't worry about it. He mentioned hearing the laughter of little girls, doors slamming even when already closed, and certain seats in the auditorium that would always be down, even though they were spring-loaded like theater seats. The janitor showed these seats to my husband, and even now, they are often found down in the mornings, regardless of whether the room had been used the previous day. Over the years, my husband has had to work third shifts occasionally, and each time he's experienced something strange. He's heard doors slam shut after closing them, muffled conversations in empty spaces, and other inexplicable noises. He's also talked to other employees, and anyone who's spent time alone in the building during off hours has a story to share. The first time I joined him at night in the empty building, we experienced something together. We had stopped there so I could use the restroom, and my husband wanted to check an office for leaks since it was raining, and the space had been problematic before. While inspecting the lab, we noticed something unsettling. As we turned to leave, he paused, staring at the gap beneath the door. Shadows were moving outside constantly, as if a large group of people was walking by. It wasn't just one or two shadows. The movement was almost continuous. After a few moments, it stopped. Curious and unnerved, we stepped out to investigate. The floor was empty. We checked the entire building and found no one. The parking lot was completely deserted. Since then, nearly every time we've been alone in the building, we've encountered something unusual. Whether it's shadows, unexplained noises, or the feeling of not being alone, the building never fails to remind us of its haunted reputation. I was working an overnight shift in an old textile mill that had been standing for 117 years. My job that night was to keep an eye on a leaky water main where it entered the building. By 11 p.m., the building was completely empty. Security had made their rounds earlier and assured me that I was the only one inside. Around 11:30 p.m., after a quick walk through the building to confirm I was alone, I returned to my post near the leaking pipe. The small space didn't offer much to do, so I settled down with a book to pass the time. At about 12:30 a.m., I heard muffled voices coming from outside the room. Startled, I got up and poked my head into the hallway, but it was empty. Shrugging it off, I went back to reading. Then the voices came again. This time, I walked out of the room and down the hall, checking every door and room along the way. Still, there was no one there. The building had 3 floors, but I only checked the first floor since it was where I was stationed. Trying to shake off the unease, I sat back down with my book, but after a while, I felt restless. Deciding to stretch my legs, I took a walk through the building. The 3rd floor was completely silent as I walked down the main corridor. The same was true for the 2nd floor. Looking out the windows, I saw that my vehicle was still the only one in the parking lot. About an hour later, after finishing my tour and heating up some dinner, I returned to my post. While eating, I heard the muffled voices again. This time I decided to ignore them, and eventually they either faded away or I managed to block them out. After dinner, I read for about an hour without any interruptions. At 3 a.m., I decided to use the bathroom. Walking down the corridor, I passed 4 dark and quiet offices before reaching the restroom. After finishing, I washed my hands and stepped back into the hallway. That's when I noticed a small desk lamp glowing inside the office nearest to me. Confused, I peeked outside to check the parking lot, but no cars were there. Building up some courage, I entered the locked office where the light was on. The room was empty, and nothing seemed out of place. I turned off the lamp, closed the door tightly, and backed away, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Just as I re-entered the space near the leaking pipe, I heard a door slam behind me. My heart jumped, and I may have let out a startled scream. I'm not sure. I turned and looked down the hallway, but it was empty. Feeling both terrified and determined, I walked back down the hall. The last office near the bathroom, the one where I had turned off the lamp, had the light on again. This time, I didn't bother turning it off. I returned to my post and sat down, too rattled to focus on my book. Instead, I just listened. The voices came and went, sometimes growing so loud that it felt like I could almost make out the words, but not quite. The atmosphere was tense, and the hours seemed to drag. Finally, as the sun rose and light crept into the building, the voices stopped. When the first shift worker arrived just before 6 a.m., I couldn't get out of there fast enough. The whole experience was too unsettling for me, and it's one I'll never forget. We moved into our current apartment in November 2004, right before Thanksgiving. Our old apartment was just a block and a half away, so instead of renting a moving truck, my children and I decided to move things ourselves. After work, we'd load up the car, drive over, and unpack. That's when the strange things began. The apartment has a mudroom with a locking door that leads to the main door of the apartment. The mudroom door has a lock on the handle, and the main door has a lock on the handle and a deadbolt. One night, as we were leaving to grab another load, my son asked if he should lock all the locks. I told him no, since we'd be back in about 45 minutes, and to just lock the handle on the main door. When we returned, we found that the mudroom door, the main door handle, and the deadbolt were all locked. It was odd, but we brushed it off and continued moving things in. A few months later, my children and I were eating dinner in the dining room. My son was sitting across from me with the kitchen behind me when he suddenly got a strange look on his face. Not scared, just puzzled. He pointed to his sister's sneakers, which were sitting near the kitchen island. Out of nowhere, they flipped onto their sides. None of us could explain it. Over time, my son became reluctant to go upstairs unless someone was home. He said he often felt like someone was pushing him down the stairs, and a few times he actually fell backward. Things would also disappear, only to reappear months later in the strangest places. Another incident happened one night when my husband and I were sleeping. I woke up to the strong smell of cigarette smoke. I used to smoke, but I had quit, and my husband always smoked outside because of our daughter's asthma. I woke him up and asked if he had just smoked, and he said no. When I asked if he could smell the smoke, he initially said no. Later, he admitted he did smell it but didn't want me to stay up all night worrying about it. We started joking about the activity and gave the presents a name, Bob. One of the most memorable incidents happened on Christmas Day 2006. I was washing dishes, my son was in his room, my husband was watching TV, and my daughter was running up the stairs to her room. As she ran, the light on our baker's rack flickered on and off with each step she took. Thinking I was imagining it, I called her back and asked her to run up the stairs again. She thought I was being ridiculous. I'm always telling her not to run in the house, but she did it anyway. The light flickered again, step for step. This time, my husband saw it too. I joked, maybe Bob is upset because no one wished him a Merry Christmas. My daughter, laughing, yelled, "Merry Christmas, Bob!" and ran up the stairs again. This time, the light didn't flicker. Since then, dozens of small incidents have occurred in the apartment. Sometimes I think about researching the building's history, but something holds me back. It's a strange feeling, as if I don't want to know the answers. When I was 8 years old, my family moved into a beautiful house built in the late 1800s. At first, I thought it was perfect, but the events that unfolded inside that house were anything but ordinary. Started just a few days after we moved in. My mother went to the basement to do laundry. The basement was dark and unfinished, with concrete floors and stone walls. While gathering clothes, she caught sight of someone out of the corner of her eye. When she turned to look, the figure was still there, a woman dressed in early 1900s attire, staring at my mother with an intense, almost judgmental gaze. My mom ran out of the basement and refused to go back alone for the rest of the time we lived there. Our family consisted of my parents, 2 brothers, my sister, and me, but curiously, only the women in our household. My mom, my sister, and I experienced anything paranormal. My brothers and dad were completely unaffected. To this day, I find that strange. My personal experiences began with a Ouija board. I was 10 years old when my sister, my oldest brother, and I decided to play with it. We made contact with a spirit that identified itself as Fanny. a 13-year-old girl who claimed to live in my sister's room. This was especially eerie because my sister's best friend at the time was also named Fanny. We weren't sure if the spirit was being playful, if my sister was moving the planchette subconsciously, or if there really was a spirit named Fanny. Things took a chilling turn when we heard a moan come from the dining room. None of us dared to investigate. Fanny seemed friendly at first. She told me I'd live to be 99 and that I'd dye my hair black. I didn't think much of it then, but this Ouija board session marked the beginning of my encounters with the paranormal. Countless nights, I felt as though I was being watched while lying in bed. The feeling was so unsettling that I often fled to my parents' room for comfort. One day, about 7 months after using the Ouija board, I was sitting on my laptop in my room when I heard a deep, menacing voice say, "Get out, now." Wide-eyed, I muttered, "Okay," and didn't return to my bedroom that night. The strange occurrences escalated. I'd hear thumping on the walls, and my sister experienced constant footsteps running up and down the stairs at night. Once, when she was home alone, my brother's alarm clock went off. When she went to turn it off, she found it had been thrown across the room, still ringing. Horrified, she spent the rest of the night sitting with our dogs. My experiences continued. One time, while lying on my stomach doing homework, I felt a hand grab my ankle. Thinking it was my sister playing a prank, I turned around, but no one was there. The room instantly grew freezing cold, and I bolted out of there, too scared to return. The worst 2 encounters I had involved a terrifying apparition. One evening, I was cuddling with my dog on the back of the sofa when he suddenly moved aside. Behind him, I saw a girl with greenish skin, half-decayed teeth, and dark, messy hair. She smiled at me in the creepiest way imaginable. Frozen in horror, I eventually told my parents, but they dismissed it as my imagination. I know what I saw, it was real. A few months later, I had a vivid dream about the same girl. In the dream, I was in the sunroom, a space surrounded by windows. I opened one of the shutters and saw a lit patch of grass outside. Suddenly, the girl appeared under the light. She looked lifeless. I stared at her, confirming she was dead, but then she rolled out of the light. I woke up gasping for air, utterly terrified. We moved out of that house 2.5 years ago, and I've been much happier in our new home. I no longer feel watched at night, and the atmosphere is lighter. Still, I can't help but wonder, how was the old house haunted if no one had ever died there? Were the spirits kind or malevolent? My mom believes the ghosts grew to like us over time, though my experiences felt far from friendly. Even now, I occasionally encounter ghostly phenomena in my neighborhood or while driving. It seems I have an ability to see spirits, just as my mom does. My sister, on the other hand, appears to hear them. Living in that haunted house left me paranoid and changed me forever. I'm 21 years old and have been living in this house for nearly a decade. It wasn't until around 2005 that I started noticing strange things happening. The first encounter was with what I call the ghost dog, whom I've named Buddy. When my brother moved out in July 2005, I decided to switch to his room, a large, half-finished basement. For a couple of months, everything seemed normal. Then, in September, I began hearing heavy dog breathing and panting at night, as if a dog was inches away from my head. It sounded like an excited dog, eager to play. I usually sleep on my side, facing the wall, and every time I'd hear it, I'd turn over to look, but the sound would stop instantly, leaving the room completely silent. This happened almost every night, sometimes multiple times. The disruption started affecting my sleep, and I even missed school due to exhaustion. Desperate for a solution, I began running the air conditioning, TV, or stereo at night to drown out the sound. Most of the time, this worked, unless Buddy wanted to make his presence known. On those nights, I'd wake up to find the air conditioning or TV turned off, even though my clock radio remained on, ruling out a power outage. Over the years, the breathing has become less frequent. I recently rearranged my room and now sleep on the opposite side. I think Buddy favors the north side of my bedroom because I don't hear him as often. I've never found bite marks, scratches, or any signs of aggression, so I assume Buddy is a friendly dog who may have passed away in this house. That might explain why the landlords don't allow pets here. Sometimes objects go missing, only to reappear moments later when I leave the room and return. If I say, "Buddy, cut it out," the missing item will often show up right where I left it, as if by magic. Earlier this year, something else started happening. Something I don't think is Buddy. Around March or April, I was at home watching TV while my parents were at work. It was around 5 or 6 p.m. when I heard footsteps walking around upstairs. I muted the TV and listened closely. The steps were heavy, like someone wearing boots. Thinking someone had broken in, I grabbed my gun and cautiously checked the house. It was completely empty. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the creaks of an old house, but the footsteps continued. Sometimes, they'd stop as soon as I ran upstairs to check, leaving only silence behind. Other times, I'd hear the sound of the basement Bilko doors unlocking and opening. I'd run downstairs to find the doors still securely locked. These incidents unsettled me but didn't feel dangerous until recently. One night, I had constructed a pyramid out of beer cans on my dining room table, which is in my room. I went upstairs to grab a snack, but when I came back, the pyramid had moved to my coffee table about 10 feet away, still perfectly intact. I stared at it, baffled, and as I sat down in front of it, the pyramid suddenly collapsed before my eyes. Freaked out, I grabbed my shoes and left the house for the night. When I returned, I rebuilt the pyramid on the dining room table and set up my webcam with a motion detection feature to monitor it. It's been 2 weeks, and the cans haven't moved, nor has the camera captured anything unusual. I can't shake the feeling that whatever it is knows I'm watching. That's everything I can recall for now. I'm not entirely sure if my house is haunted. There always seems to be a logical explanation for everything. Still, I can't deny that something is here. Since I'm in the storytelling mood, I might share another story about the weird things that happened in the house I lived in before this one. I'm 21 years old, originally from Long Island but now living in New Jersey. For as long as I can remember, since I was around 12 or 13, I've felt like something has been following me. At first, I thought I was just scaring myself by watching too many scary stories, but the feeling never went away. By the time I was 16, I was terrified of the dark, convinced that something could hurt me when the lights were off. When my mom passed away 2 years ago, the experiences intensified. I started having horrible, traumatizing dreams. At home, I often felt like someone was walking toward me, but when I turned around, no one was there. I heard a strange noise, almost like the one from Paranormal Activity 3. A growing, eerie sound that gets louder as something approaches. I'd hear it when no one else was around. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew I wasn't scared for no reason. When I was 19 or 20, I moved back into my old house with my ex. People claimed they heard movement upstairs when no one was home. I told myself it was my mom watching over me. But now, the experiences have started to overwhelm me again. I met a girl recently who described herself as a visionary. She could read my energy with pinpoint accuracy. I invited her over one night because I'd been feeling uneasy, especially about the closet in my room. Constantly caught my attention, and I felt like I was being watched. Without me telling her, she confirmed that something was in the closet. That same night, my 2-year-old brother, who was sleeping in my room, cried and said he saw a pair of eyes staring at him. I quickly grabbed him and left the room. Another time, my brother was awake but wouldn't open his eyes. He cried in Spanish, saying, "Okay, that's it, no more." I could feel in my heart that something was there, terrifying him to the point he didn't even want to look. I didn't know what to do. Although I was reluctant, I went to a card reader for answers. She told me I had a Moreno Muerto Montao following me, a spirit of a black man who was envious of me and wanted me to suffer. She said he blocks love, happiness, and peace from entering my life and draws bad things to me. For example, I once had a job offer a block away, but on my way there, my muffler fell off and I lost the opportunity. She advised me to sleep with a clear glass of water by my bed to absorb negative energy and to thank God daily for what I have, rather than asking for more. She also warned me about my past mistake of using a Ouija board. I thought it was harmless, but it turned out to be anything but. The spirit claimed to be good and said it was my reincarnation, promising to protect me. But it lied. It was a man in his 30s, not the young girl it pretended to be, and it attached itself to me. The card reader suggested I wear a charm bracelet so the charms would fall off one by one, absorbing negativity along the way. She also said I was very spiritual but warned that my energy wasn't always good. I remembered one night, around the time my mom passed away, when I woke up in the strangest way. It felt like I was floating above my bed, looking down at myself. There was a shadowy figure where I should have been lying. I was on my back, which is unusual for me, and I felt as if the shadow was pinning me down. To this day, I can't fully explain what happened. Things have been further complicated by my father's marriage to a Dominican woman. In our Colombian culture, we know about brujeria, witchcraft, and the card reader suggested that she might have used it to manipulate my father. There's a Santera in the corner of my room near the closet. Another source of unease. I want to remove it, but I'm too afraid. I was told my bed is the safest spot in the room, but at times, I feel like something is going to grab my foot or pull me under the bed. One night, I woke up with my foot bent painfully downward, as if something had been holding it in that position all night. The pain was so bad I could barely walk. Despite everything, I refuse to give in to negativity because I've learned that it feeds off those emotions. But it's hard to stay positive when so much around me feels dark and heavy. I want people to know that what I'm experiencing is real. This isn't a joke or a figment of my imagination. It's something I've been struggling with for years. It seems to be getting worse, but I refuse to let it take over my life. I think the first time anything happened was about 2 years ago. Nothing had changed. No one died, we didn't move, and no one committed any major sins that I know of. Could something have activated a resting ghost? Or is that just the stuff of movies? I've always had a weird fascination with scary things, so maybe my imagination could explain part of it. But there were others present during some of the events. The first incident happened while I was watching TV with my little brother. We heard a noise coming from the bathroom and instantly recognized it. It was the soap dispenser. You know, the ones that play a little tune when you push the nozzle? My parents bought it years ago to help my brother learn the proper length of time to wash his hands. But the batteries had been dead for at least a year. Yet there it was, loud and clear. This is the way we wash our hands. Wash our hands. Wash our hands. And people wonder why I hated that thing. I jumped up and my brother followed close behind. I raced to the bathroom door, and the second my hand touched the doorknob, the song stopped. Not like it ran out of batteries, not like it finished the tune. It just stopped, cutting off halfway through the word, wash. My brother and I exchanged a look, shrugged it off and sat back down. But the second we did, the song started again, right where it had left off. This happened 3 or 4 more times. Every time I went to the door, the song stopped abruptly. Then, later that night, something even stranger happened. I was taking a shower in the same bathroom when I heard the song play again. I yelled my brother's name, but there was no response. I didn't investigate because I figured the same thing would happen. Every time I'd move the curtain, it would stop. When I stepped out of the shower, my eyes were immediately drawn to the mirror. It was completely fogged over, except for 2 words written in big, bold block letters. Stop it! I freaked out but never told anyone. Since then, weird things have happened regularly. Doors slam shut and swing open on their own. Lights go out suddenly only to flicker back on. Objects fall off shelves for no apparent reason. As for the soap dispenser, it's long gone, rotting in some landfill and good riddance. The scariest event happened a while later. I had a nightmare, though I couldn't remember much of it. Just that all the lights went out in the dream. When I woke up, I instinctively reached for the light switch. Nothing. I flicked it again and again, but the light wouldn't turn on. Panicking, I ran downstairs and tried the other lights. They all worked, and my fear started to subside. The next day, my dad tried replacing the bulb in my room. Nothing. He swapped in a few other bulbs, but still the light didn't work. That night, I had another nightmare, this time about a blinding, overwhelming light. When I woke up, all the lights in my room were on. The ceiling light, my desk lamp, and even the small nightlight I'd been using because the overhead light was out. I turned them all off and went back to sleep. But when I woke up in the morning, all the lights were on again. So what do you think? Am I haunted? Or is it just my imagination? I'm Kennedy, a 13-year-old honors student from the United States. My parents are split up, so I live with my mom, stepdad, and two little brothers, ages 1.5 and 4, at her house, while my dad lives with his girlfriend and her two daughters, ages 6 and 13. Over the years, I've experienced several strange events. I'm not sure if they're connected or just coincidences, but they've stuck with me. The first real experience I can remember happened after my grandmother died in September 2006, when I was 8 years old. She and I were very close, always spending time together when I was younger. After her death, I started having strange dreams about her. In these dreams, she would float in the air for a few seconds before disappearing. That was the entire dream, short but unsettling. One night, when I was about 9 and staying at my mom's house, I woke up around 3:30 a.m. My room was dimly lit by my nightlight, and when I looked toward the doorway, I saw a gray figure standing there. I froze in fear before screaming and running into my parents' bedroom. I told them there was someone in the hallway, but they didn't believe me and sent me back to bed. I couldn't fall asleep again until morning. Now, a bit of background about my dad. When I was 2, my mom and dad split up. They were never married. Not long after, he started dating a woman, Mary, who had a special needs son named Jordan. Jordan was 8 when they started dating, and when he turned 11, he tragically passed away from a seizure, right in the house where I now stay with my dad. After my dad and Mary broke up, he started dating Casey, who moved in with her cat while I already had a dog. When I was 10, I had one of the scariest experiences of my life. I was trying to fall asleep at my dad's house when my bed suddenly started shaking violently. It only lasted about 30 seconds, but as a 10-year-old, it felt like an eternity. I knew it wasn't my pets because I always checked to make sure they weren't in my room before bed. I didn't want accidents on my carpet. My door was shut, my windows were closed, and I couldn't find any explanation for it. More recently, at my mom's house, I've been hearing strange things. Footsteps, doors shutting, and other odd noises. One night, I got up to use the bathroom. As I walked back toward the door after washing my hands, I swear I heard a child's voice coming from the kitchen or computer room. Sounded like a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, but it wasn't one of my brothers. I couldn't make out what she was saying, and I was too scared to leave the bathroom. I sat on the floor until I finally worked up the courage to run back to my room. Last month, I decided to spend the night at my grandparents' house. Their house is relatively new. They built it themselves about 20 years ago, and they're the only ones who have ever lived there. Even so, the guest room they prepared for me felt strange, so I ended up sleeping in their bed with them. Around 2 a.m., I woke up and noticed my grandmother had moved to the living room. She often does this because I toss and turn a lot at night. I fell back asleep but had a horrible nightmare about wandering the halls of their house while something followed me. I woke up suddenly to the feeling of something touching my foot, from the side where my grandmother would normally sleep. Their dog was locked in its crate for the night. I had watched my grandfather latch it. Terrified, I ran to the living room to tell my grandmother. She assured me it was just a dream and made me a bed on the couch beside her. She fell back asleep immediately, but I was too freaked out to close my eyes. I stayed up watching TV until morning. I'm not sure if any of these events are connected, but they've left a lasting impression on me. For the record, I've never touched a Ouija board or done anything like that, though I do enjoy watching ghost hunting shows on TV. Maybe that explains some of it, or maybe not. I live in a house in New Jersey that was built in the 1970s. Over the past 10 years, my family and I have experienced numerous incidents that have convinced us our house is haunted. From hearing footsteps late at night when everyone is in bed to feeling unexplained taps on our shoulders and backs, to objects mysteriously moving on their own, the activity has been frequent and unsettling. Even visitors have reported strange sensations or sightings without us ever mentioning our own experiences. My mother, older sister, and I have long suspected that someone might be buried in the basement. The basement is the creepiest part of the house, hands down. Even with the lights on, it's unnervingly eerie. Back when the house was built, the basement floor would have been dirt, which adds another layer to our suspicion. There are plenty of stories I could share to explain why we believe this, but for now, I'll focus on one of the most recent and chilling experiences we've had. A month or two ago, a severe thunderstorm hit our area. The storm was so bad that officials advised everyone to stay indoors because trees were falling onto streets and homes. One of those trees fell on my sister's house, so she came to stay the night with her 8-year-old daughter and 3-year-old son at our house. We were all sitting on the couch, watching TV and chatting, when my nephew suddenly ran into the kitchen. My mom and I followed him to see what was wrong. He was crouched by the sink and kitchen counter, crying and screaming. When we asked him what was wrong, he shouted, "This is the only place where she can't see me." Naturally, we asked, "Who?" But that only made him cry harder. He kept saying she was very scary and refused to let anyone pick him up. Instead of wanting to be with his family, he insisted on staying in that one spot behind the counter. He even said he wanted to sleep there so she wouldn't see him. Eventually, my mom picked him up despite his kicking and screaming. She carried him back to the living room, and he slowly began to calm down. But not even an hour later, he started screaming again and ran right back to the same spot behind the counter. This time, my sister, mom, and I tried to get more information out of him. Through his tears, he described what he saw. A very bad girl knocking at the door. She was very, very bad. She had red eyes and she was wearing a dress. I could see her belly. She had sharp teeth and she was really bad. She's knocking at the door. Took us over an hour to calm him down again. Even now, thinking about that night gives me chills. My nephew wasn't making this up. His description was too vivid, and his terror was too real. We'd never seen him so petrified before. Adding to the eeriness is the fact that my family often hears knocking at our door, only to find no one there. This happens a few times a week. My mom and I recently discussed how strange it was that my nephew specifically mentioned the bad girl knocking at the door, especially with her sharp teeth. That detail made us think about vampire folklore, where it's said that a vampire must be invited into your home before they can enter. Not that we necessarily believe she was a vampire, but the parallel is unsettling. My mom and I have always believed that vampires can also serve as a metaphor for things or people that suck the life out of you. Regardless of what it was, the experience was terrifying. Not just for my nephew but also for my mom, sister, and me, even though we didn't see her ourselves. I still get chills thinking about it, especially when I'm alone at night. When I first purchased my home, it was still in a state of disarray. The sunroom was crammed with boxes and appliances, and plastic sheeting covered doorways to minimize dust from renovations. I was working quickly to get everything ready because my fiancé would soon be moving in. One of the first spaces I set up was the sole room on the 3rd floor, which I converted into my office. It was bright and sunny, the perfect spot for me to work from home on my computer. Living alone, I appreciated the solitude and lack of distractions. One morning, while sitting in my office chair, deep in thought about my next writing task, I heard the faint creak of a stair on the 1st floor. It was just a single creak, nothing more, so I dismissed it. But a few minutes later, another creak came, this time further up the stairs. I paused and listened. My fiancée has always loved sneaking up on me to scare me. It's practically a tradition. So my first thought was that she'd come over without telling me. Yet there was no follow-up sound. No sudden boo. Just silence. Having lived in old houses before, I know how they tend to make odd noises. Wood expands and contracts, pipes knock, and structures settle. As a retired police officer, I'm also not easily frightened. In 20 years of service, I've walked into enough dark rooms and faced people scarier than anything you'd see in a horror movie. I don't believe in ghosts and afterlife or the supernatural, so I wasn't thinking of hauntings. Instead, I was concerned I might have an intruder in the house. One thing they teach you in law enforcement is to stay still. Don't move, don't react, don't breathe. Just listen and wait for the other person to make the first move. That morning, I sat motionless in my chair, ears tuned to the faintest sound. Minutes passed, and I heard nothing. Convinced it was just the house settling, I turned back to my keyboard, ready to resume my work. That's when it happened again. This time, the sound wasn't a solitary creak, but a sequence of steady, deliberate footsteps. They started on the stairs leading up from the first floor and continued, one step at a time. Each tread creaked under the weight of someone climbing, their shoes softly scraping the wood. And they were getting closer. My heart started to pound, and the hairs on my arms stood up. This wasn't just the house settling. Someone or something was walking up the stairs. The sound moved from the second floor to the stairwell leading to the third. My desk sat less than 10 feet from the stairwell, and I could hear the footsteps clearly, each one heavy and deliberate. I stared at the stairs, waiting for whoever it was to appear around the corner. But then they stopped. I froze, fingers still hovering over my keyboard, staring at the stairwell. I waited for a figure to emerge, but no one came. The silence stretched on, thick and unnerving. Finally, I snapped out of it, jumped from my chair, and ran to the top of the stairs. Peering around the corner, I saw nothing. I checked the second floor, room by room. It was empty. I rushed down to the first floor. The front and back doors were locked, just as I had left them. Determined to be thorough, I even searched the basement, checking every corner. Still, I found no one. I was completely alone. There's no doubt in my mind, those were footsteps I heard on my stairs. To this day, whenever I walk down them, the creaks are loud and unmistakable, instantly reminding me of that morning. I remember sitting in my office, waiting for someone to come around the corner, only to realize there was no one there at all. When I worked as a security guard for the old Abraham and Strauss stores, part of the job involved performing overnight checks of the alarm system. 2 guards would stay in the store, one walking the floor to trigger each alarm, the other stationed in the control room to verify the system was working. We'd communicate over walkie-talkies, coordinating which alarm was being tested and where the floor guard was headed next. From the start, I'd heard rumors from other guards that the store was haunted. Some said the Paramus Park Mall in Paramus, New Jersey, was built on an old Native American burial ground. Whether that was true or not, the stories were always whispered about, and many guards had their own tales of strange occurrences. One story that stuck with me was about a guard who fell asleep on a mattress in the bedding department, near the kitchen section. He claimed that when he woke up, every knife from the display and countertops had been moved to point directly at him, blades out. Terrified, he reportedly shouted, promising to never come back or disturb them, whoever them was. I've always been skeptical about the paranormal. There's usually a logical explanation for everything. But one night, I experienced something that shook my disbelief to its core. It was my turn to do the overnight alarm check, and I volunteered to walk the floor. The routine was straightforward. I'd start on the 3rd floor and work my way down to the 1st, testing alarms as I went. The store layout was typical of department stores, with escalators in the center of each floor surrounded by tiled walkways, leading to carpeted departments filled with racks of clothing. Emergency lights provided minimal illumination, so I relied on my flashlight to navigate the darker sections. That night began uneventfully. As I climbed the escalator to the 3rd floor, turned off after closing, I reached the landing and heard a soft whoosh. It sounded like a large box being pushed across the carpet, followed by the distinct clatter of plastic hangers knocking together. I paused, shining my flashlight into the darkened department. I saw nothing and figured it was the air conditioning unit kicking on and pushing the hangers. I continued testing the 3rd floor alarms without incident and started down the escalator to the 2nd floor. About halfway down, I heard footsteps on the tiled perimeter of the escalator well above me. The sound was clear, neither the heavy clomp of boots nor the sharp click of heels, but steady, deliberate footsteps. I froze on the stairs, listening as the footsteps grew louder, heading toward the top of the escalator. By the time I reached the 2nd floor and turned to look up, the sound had stopped. There was no one there. The silence stretched for a moment, but then the footsteps started again, this time running down the escalator. The pace quickened, as though someone was charging straight toward me. I stood rooted to the spot, staring up the dark stairwell, hearing the sound approach but seeing no one. Then, just as the invisible figure reached me, the sound passed through me. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. My body tensed, every hair standing on end, and I could feel the silence that followed settle heavily around me. My heart pounded in my ears as I fumbled for my walkie-talkie. "I'm done," I told the other guard in the control room. "I'm coming back. I'm not finishing the rest of the test." When I got back to the office, I explained what had happened. Curious and skeptical, the other guard decided to head out onto the floor himself. He wandered around for about 15 minutes, hoping to hear or see something, but nothing happened. Dejected, he returned, leaving me shaken and determined not to venture out again that night. Even now, more than 25 years later, retelling this story sends shivers down my spine. After that night, I continued doing alarm checks on other occasions but never experienced anything similar. Other guards, however, had their own stories, some minor, like odd noises, and others more dramatic. One recurring incident involved all the TVs in the store suddenly turning on at full volume. Each department had monitors that usually played ads or music during business hours, and they required manual activation. Yet, guards reported finding all of them blaring in the middle of the night. The escalators were another mystery. They'd often start running on their own, despite needing a key to operate. Among us guards, it became a running joke that there were two kinds of people: those who'd met the Paramus Park ghosts and those who hadn't yet. I moved into my current apartment in the first week of June, and since then, I've been struggling to get a good night's sleep. I don't suffer from insomnia or any sleep disorders. In fact, I've always been able to sleep peacefully anywhere with just a pillow and a blanket. The first few weeks were fine, but the trouble began later. On June 29th, a Monday, I went out with colleagues for a team outing. I had a couple of margaritas, I don't drink often because of the hangovers, and was in bed by 9:30 p.m. The next morning, I woke up with severe vertigo, which I blamed on the alcohol. Strangely, this vertigo lingered for days, only easing up later in the day. That Tuesday night, I went to bed early, feeling tired and irritable, but my sleep was disturbed. I woke up in the middle of the night to a high-pitched shriek in my ears. It was so loud and unnatural that it didn't sound human. When I opened my eyes, the entire room was spinning. I glanced at the clock. It was 3:06 a.m., unable to keep my eyes open. I drifted back to sleep. Another night, I felt a presence in my room, standing on the left side of my bed. Strangely, it didn't scare me. Instead, I wondered if it was something divine. Things took a darker turn last Friday. I had a vivid experience that felt like a dream, though I was aware enough to think I was awake. I saw a dwarf-like figure dressed in what looked like a skirt made from jute or sack material. I sensed it was female, though it didn't seem human. Its face terrified me. The right side was distorted and almost fluid-like. I woke up completely, heart pounding, and still felt the presence in the room. The clock read 3:46 a.m. The next day, I smudged my apartment with sage, guided by a friend of Native American heritage. That Saturday night, though I kept waking up feeling uneasy, I didn't experience anything unusual. On Sunday, I attended a class about crystals, where the instructor suggested creating a crystal grid around my bed to help with sleep and protection. That evening, after smudging the apartment again, I placed the grid around my bed. As I was drifting off, I heard a thud. The sage wand I had placed on a shelf had fallen to the floor. Although I couldn't explain why it fell, I dismissed it as coincidence. Surprisingly, I slept well that night. The next few nights were anything but restful. I kept waking up between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., feeling as though the room was foggy or dreamlike. On one occasion, I felt a strange pressure pulling me from all sides, like magnets working against my body. The sensation reminded me of the rush you feel on a roller coaster. Each time I woke up, I noted the time, once at 12:48 a.m. and another time around 4 a.m. I've also noticed marks on my legs, similar to insect bites, though I plan to change the sheets to rule that out. Recently, I've experienced episodes of sleep paralysis. One particularly unsettling time, I felt as though something was squishing me. I prayed until I could move again, but the experience left me shaken. Despite these occurrences, I don't feel physically threatened. Still, I've taken steps to protect myself. I smudge the apartment regularly, burn incense, pray, and meditate before bed. Yet, the disturbances persist. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to the smell of something burning. It wasn't unpleasant. It reminded me of grilled corn from a fair. Wide awake but unwilling to investigate, I stayed in bed, worried I might see something I didn't want to. Another morning, I found my night lamp switched off even though I'm certain I left it on. This has happened a few times before, but I had dismissed it, thinking I might have forgotten. This time I was sure. Lately, I've been waking up between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., fully alert. There's no sense of fear, but I feel as though something or someone is trying to communicate with me. Sometimes, it feels like a benevolent presence, but other times, I wonder if it's pretending to be good. I've considered talking to whatever might be causing these disturbances but hesitate. I haven't used any tools like a Ouija board, and I'm not sure I'm ready to open that door. I don't know why it chooses those hours to wake me or if I'm just imagining all of this. I feel conflicted. Should I explore more or leave things as they are? Whatever it is, it doesn't feel stronger than me, and I don't sense immediate harm. My name is Rick, and I'm 17 years old. Let me get straight to the story. When I was about 5, we lived in a 2-story house, and I had an imaginary friend named Robert. Robert wasn't like other imaginary friends. He was a war hero who carried a sword and fought for his country. What scared my mom the most was that Robert taught me how to make fire using 2 sticks. He told me the sticks couldn't be wet, and I'd have to rub them together constantly to create a flame. While I don't remember these instructions clearly now, I do recall being outside with friends, trying to rub sticks together like Robert had shown me. One night, I woke up, though I can't remember if I was just waking up or reading one of my children's books, and saw something strange. A figure of a man, completely covered in what looked like TV static, peeked through the door. It was crystal clear, but oddly, I wasn't scared at all. My mom later told me she had run upstairs with her friend because she'd heard the door slam shut. From what I remember, the door was still open. Robert remained my imaginary friend for a while after that, but nothing paranormal happened again until we moved. Our new apartment had some history. 2 people had died there, and a third was suspected to have passed away before we moved in. One was a lady who lived upstairs and died in a hospital, and the other was my great-grandmother who passed away in one of the spare bedrooms. At first, everything seemed normal. We had pets, so any nighttime noises were easy to blame on them. But one day, we borrowed my grandfather's tape recorder to play around with. I was about 9 or 10 at the time. After recording random chatter, I lost interest and went over to my grandparents' house next door. When I came back, my mom replayed the tape and what we heard shocked us. She had asked a question, I don't remember what, and a deep, low voice replied, "Yeah." It scared me so much that I didn't touch the recorder for years. When I tried it again later, it was just static, as if the tape had been wiped clean. As time passed, more strange things happened. Before we moved upstairs to prepare the space for tenants, my uncle was up there cleaning. He came back down, pale as a sheet, claiming he had seen a black shadow rush past him. The sight was so overwhelming that he fainted. A year later, we moved upstairs into the apartment. That's when things got scarier. One night, we thought someone had broken into the attic. We heard footsteps above us, so my mom decided to check. As soon as she opened the attic door, the footsteps came rushing down the stairs. Panicking, she slammed the door shut, but whatever was on the other side tried to push it open. We managed to lock it, and the noises stopped. Later, my grandfather and uncle checked the attic but found nothing. We decided to place a baby monitor in the attic. One night, we heard loud moaning through the monitor. When we investigated later, we found nothing unusual, just a plastic cup or a piece of rubber. Still, it felt strange. Then, the hauntings became more intense. My mom saw something that truly shook her. She was in her room when she saw the lady who had died in the hospital. The figure was wearing a blue bathrobe and stood there silently. At the time, my grandmother was directly below the room where my mom saw the apparition. Another strange incident involved Salt. My uncle, who often spent time in the attic for some reason, sprinkled salt on the floor one day. Somehow, the salt ended up outside on the windowsill. I don't know the full story, but I plan to ask him about it when he wakes up. It was around 2000 or 2001, and I was 12 or 13 years old at the time. My family moved from California to New Hampshire when I was 5, settling in Dover. Life in Dover was calm, with nothing unusual ever happening. That's why, when we moved to Rochester a few years later, the experiences I had there were so incredible to me. We moved into an old house that had been converted into an apartment complex. It wasn't until we found an ancient pantry in the basement that we started to think about the building's age. My brother, sister, and I all shared the same uneasy feelings about the basement. It always felt like we were being watched. My sister and I, in particular, dreaded going down there. A couple of years after we moved in, our landlord cleared out a bunch of old junk from one corner of the basement, revealing a hidden door. Naturally, we were curious. It wasn't easy to open, but we managed to get inside. Behind it, we found cement shelves filled with ancient jars of old fruits, jams, and other preserved food. It was clearly a pantry from before refrigerators were common. The sight grossed us out, and we cleaned it up a little, thinking nothing of it. I've since read that disturbing old places or items can stir up activity, and I often wonder if that's what triggered the strange events that followed. One of the first incidents I remember happened in the kitchen. I was sitting at the table, talking with a neighbor, when the sink suddenly turned on by itself. It wasn't just a drip. I had to get up and physically turn the handle to shut it off. We both froze, unsure of what to say. It was the middle of the afternoon, and there was no logical explanation. Another time, I was in the living room playing with a remote-controlled car. I turned on the headlights, switched off the big light in the room, and set the remote down on the seat next to me. As I walked toward the light switch, the car started driving back and forth on its own. Terrified, I kicked it, then ran straight to my mother's room. When we returned, the car's wheels weren't moving, and it never acted like that again. The house didn't scare us all the time. I mostly felt fine unless I saw shadows out of the corner of my eye or heard my sister yelling at empty air to stop whispering her name. The basement, however, was different. Sometimes, it felt isolating and heavy, as if something was watching. Other times, it seemed perfectly normal. One day stands out as the moment I truly believed the house might be haunted. My friend Ashley was visiting, and I had to switch laundry loads in the basement. She followed me down and sat at the bottom of the stairs while I worked. As I kept an eye on the creepy old pantry door and the dark back corner of the basement, I heard Ashley gasp. I turned just in time to see her scream and bolt up the stairs. Confused, I finished loading the dryer but suddenly felt an intense urge to run. I slammed the washer door shut, hit the start button, and rushed upstairs. Ashley had locked the door behind her and was apologizing repeatedly. When I finally calmed her down, she explained that she'd seen a tall shadow figure moving toward me. It wasn't solid, but it was undeniably there. What she described matched the fleeting glimpses I'd seen out of the corner of my eye before. I was shocked. I hadn't told her about those experiences. After that, I opened up to my sister, sharing everything I'd seen and felt. She wasn't surprised. She told me she had seen and heard things too, like whispering and fleeting shadows. She believed there were multiple presences in the house. A little girl, a man, and a woman. She hated the basement and had no idea what might be down there. About a year and a half before we moved out, my dad had an encounter. He woke up in the middle of the night, feeling like he was being watched. At the foot of his bed stood a woman in a white dress. Thinking he might be dreaming, he closed his eyes and stretched to wake himself up. But when he looked again, she was still there. She didn't look quite solid, and her dress seemed off somehow. Startled, he screamed and grabbed my mom to wake her. By the time she woke up, the woman was gone. The rest of the incidents were subtler, waking up to the sensation of being touched or pulled, shadows at the edges of my vision, or random feelings of being watched. While I miss some memories of that home, I wasn't sad to leave. I slept better after we moved. Since then, I've lived in other places where I've felt uneasy but never experienced anything as intense or definitive as what happened in that apartment. My story takes place in Concord, New Hampshire, the capital of the Granite State. I was born and raised here and have always cared deeply about the city. For most of my life, I lived in a third-floor apartment of a 100-year-old brick building. My family, being atheists, lived there peacefully for 20 years without any unusual incidents. That all changed when my girlfriend, now wife Crystal, moved in with us when we were both 18. Crystal was a devout Christian, and her faith was a big part of her identity. I, on the other hand, was an atheist and never believed in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural. But shortly after she moved in, strange things began to happen. The first incident occurred when Crystal woke up in the middle of the night. She often woke briefly before falling back asleep, but this time, she saw a large black blob in the doorway of my room. It was about 7 feet tall, roughly the height of the doorway. It didn't move or make any sound, but she felt an overwhelming sense of fear. She tried to convince herself it wasn't real and eventually fell asleep. When she told me about it the next day, I assured her it was probably her imagination. I had lived in that apartment my whole life without anything strange happening, until now. After a week of her moving in, we both started experiencing things we couldn't explain. I had joined her in Bible studies, intending to challenge her beliefs, but something started to change in me. As I spent more time thinking about faith, the activity in the apartment intensified. The first thing I saw was a large white blob moving slowly across the room. It appeared thick, almost solid, and gave off an unexplainable euphoric feeling. I told Crystal about it, and she pointed out that it sounded like what she had seen, except hers was black and caused fear. The stark contrast puzzled us both. As weeks passed, the occurrences became more vivid and frequent. One evening, I was walking toward the hallway from the kitchen when I saw the torso of a woman in a vibrant red dress float by. Every detail of the dress was clear, and the sight startled me so much that I ran to check if anyone in the apartment was wearing red. No one was. Another afternoon, Crystal and I were in my room when she saw a young man in century-old white clothes walk through the room. He smiled at her before vanishing through the wall. Although I didn't see him, Crystal said the experience made her feel happy, not scared. Not all encounters were pleasant. One night, I went to the kitchen for a midnight snack. The moment I stepped into the room, I was overwhelmed by a deep sense of fear and dread. My entire body tingled. I turned on the light, and the feeling disappeared. As I prepared my snack, the sensation returned, stronger than before. I turned around to find the outline of a person, glowing with energy, standing there. The figure had clearly defined arms, legs, and a head but wasn't solid. I was paralyzed with fear as it started moving toward me. When it passed through me, I felt an icy cold rush through my body. In that moment, an image of Jesus came to my mind, and instinctively, I commanded the being to leave the house in Jesus' name. I yelled at it, declaring that it wasn't welcome. As soon as I did, the fear vanished, and peace returned to the room. I hoped that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. One evening, Crystal and I decided to have a Bible study with our friend Steph. Halfway through, we heard faint whistling coming from the living room. We paused, thinking it was the TV, but the whistling continued between commercials, growing louder and louder. It was an old work tune we didn't recognize. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. At that exact moment, we all heard a deep, booming voice say, "Go!" We panicked, unsure of what we had just experienced. When my parents came home later, we told them everything. The only explanation we could think of was that good and bad spirits were battling in the apartment, possibly triggered by Crystal's religious faith and her efforts to share it with me. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I grew up in a town caught between country and city, where too many people lived with too few buildings. There were bad parts of town I was warned to avoid because desperation often led to trouble. The town was large enough to have a historical museum, though it only opened for an hour on Tuesdays, and small enough that family stores were being replaced by corporate chains. Forests were cleared to make way for new homes, and the landscape of my childhood began to change. Our house wasn't old like many others around town. It was built on farmland and was part of the growing suburbs encroaching on the countryside. My parents, city folks, my mom from Detroit and my dad, an immigrant from Quebec, chose this house for its modernity. While friends living in older, rural homes often told stories of hauntings, I had few such tales to share. The first unusual event happened when I was 5. Like many kids, I loved stuffed animals, and my favorite at the time was a large Sesame Street Ernie doll. Could talk when you pressed its hand. However, after a week of playing with it, I'd grown bored, and it ended up forgotten in the back of my closet with dead batteries. One night, I woke up from a nightmare. I often had them and would wake trembling, staring at the orange glow of my nightlight on the sheets. This night felt no different, until it was shattered by a voice. It was garbled but clear enough. "I feel great. I feel great." The sound, though in English, felt alien to me. I bolted down the hall, screaming, though I don't remember making any noise. My mom rushed to me and pulled Ernie from the shelf in my closet. "I feel great," it repeated in her hands. I don't recall what happened next. My mom told me later she threw it out or dismantled it, blaming the lingering charge in the doll's capacitors for the voice. I accepted this explanation and quickly forgot about Ernie, but that incident set a tone for how I approached the unknown. Face it head-on. This approach wasn't always wise. When I found a snake in the yard, I thought its yellow tail was beautiful and yanked on it, unaware it was a venomous copperhead. Another time, while selling Girl Scout cookies, a red-tailed hawk swooped low over my head and landed nearby. Ignoring its talons and curved beak, I tried to pet it. My mom, horrified, dragged me away just in time. When I was 7, our family dog became ill. He'd been with me my whole life, and losing him seemed impossible. My mom explained he didn't have long, and I broke down, sobbing in her arms. In the midst of my hysteria, I felt something indescribable, like a hand had reached into my mind, calming my thoughts. A question emerged. How long do you want him to live? Without thinking, I answered, 2 years. Only later did I regret not asking for more time, but the presence had already faded. 2 years later, the dog's health failed rapidly. He stopped eating and lost weight until he was frail and sickly. We eventually had to put him down, and as we left the vet's office, I realized it had been exactly 2 years since I'd made that wish. Guilt consumed me. I felt like I had caused his death. Years passed without major incidents. By the time I was 11, I had developed OCD, which transformed my thoughts into cycles of fear and self-punishment. God became a cold observer in my mind, indifferent to my suffering yet impossible to please. My nights were sleepless, filled with obsessive thoughts and fear. One night, in the midst of a vivid dream, everything stopped. A calm presence entered my mind, silencing the chaos. A figure appeared, human but not quite, dressed in black with indistinct features. It moved unnaturally, yet I found comfort in its presence. Without speaking, it conveyed a simple message. I am here. Then, it disappeared, leaving behind a calm that persisted into my waking life. Odd occurrences followed. My mom sometimes heard voices in my room at night, which she assumed were YouTube videos. Occasionally, I woke to see a shadowy humanoid figure standing in my room. Recording myself sleeping never worked. The footage always stopped at 1 hour and 47 minutes. In the space between dreams and waking, I occasionally heard a faint lullaby behind the static. These dreams always ended with the shadow figure watching me. I can't say whether these were real or just my imagination, but they felt significant. I don't believe the presence was an angel or demon. It called itself a scavenger, though it offered little explanation. To this day, I wonder if it was simply a manifestation of my mind or something external. The memories remain fragmented, but they feel important. One of my earliest nightmares still haunts me. I was 5, dreaming of an endless void filled with strange cubes that both existed and didn't. The paradoxical nature of the dream terrified me, and its imagery has stayed with me. Even my fond memories carry a strange weight. For years, I believed the bird I tried to pet was a red-tailed hawk. My mom recently corrected me, insisting it was a turkey vulture. I'm still convinced she's wrong. I remember its rust-colored feathers and sharp eyes vividly. These are the memories I've recovered so far. They may seem disjointed, but I hope they hold clues to understanding what I experienced. Perhaps, with time, the bigger picture will become clear. I'm new to sharing my experiences online, but I've decided to talk about what's happened to me over the years. I've only shared these stories with a few people before now. Looking back, I think it all started when I was around 8 years old. The TV in the basement of my house would randomly turn on by itself. It always seemed to happen at the most inconvenient times, right before we were heading to bed or just as everyone was leaving for school. This went on for a few months and then stopped completely. Things didn't pick up again until I was in 5th grade, which turned out to be my most active year for paranormal experiences. For some reason, I just felt like there was something in my house. One night, while I was in the basement alone, I decided to try talking to whatever it was. I set up a system where I would ask yes or no questions, and it would respond by tapping on the wall, 1 tap for yes, 2 taps for no. At some point, I even made a homemade Ouija board on a table in the basement using a see-through plastic cup as the planchette. That's how I began regularly communicating with a spirit that identified itself as a little girl named Abby. Abby told me she was 8 years old, but I don't remember much about our conversations. I just know I spent a lot of time talking to her. That's when strange things started happening around the house. During this time, 5th and 6th grade, I ended up buying a real Ouija board. By then, I believed I was talking to 2 ghosts, Abby and my grandfather. Abby's presence was unsettling. She did things that scared and disturbed me. On the other hand, my grandfather's presence felt more comforting and protective. At night, I'd hear whispers, often coming from the right side of my room or the doorway. Sometimes, it sounded like someone stepping on a candy wrapper near my bed. Once, I woke up and saw a small shadow dart from my closet to the corner of the room. I screamed, waking up everyone in the house. Another time, while I was outside, I saw a larger shadow move across the roof. There were frequent tapping noises on the walls, and sometimes I couldn't pinpoint where they were coming from. There were also times when I felt like my grandfather's spirit was interacting with me. On 2 occasions, while I was on the swings outside, I felt as though someone was pushing me, just like how you'd push a child on a swing. One memorable incident was when I used the Ouija board to try to contact my grandfather while home alone. My dog started barking uncontrollably and wouldn't calm down. The scariest experience happened when I actually saw an apparition. I think I was around 11 or 12 years old at the time. I was lying in bed at night when I thought I heard something on my right. I turned to look, but nothing was there. When I turned back, I saw her. By the foot of my bed, on the left side, was a little girl hovering just over my feet with her arms stretched out toward me. She had long, tangled hair and wore an old-fashioned nightgown with frills at the bottom and on the wrists. She wasn't entirely solid. Her figure was bluish-white and slightly translucent. She was there for about 3 seconds before vanishing. I was terrified. Eventually, I stopped using the Ouija board in my house, and the frightening activity slowed down. Now, I'm 14 and going into 9th grade. Every once in a while, something happens, like a few months ago when I heard footsteps in the attic, but it's nothing like what I experienced before. Despite the quiet, I still feel like Abby and my grandfather are around. I always got a bad vibe from Abby, though. I've started to wonder if she was being truthful with me during our conversations. Even though she doesn't seem as active now, when she does show signs, it still scares me. I want to get rid of Abby's presence entirely. Does anyone have advice on how to do that? I feel like she wasn't always honest with me, and I'd rather not keep feeling her energy around the house. I've tried searching for answers in books and online, but nothing seems to describe what I'm going through. I've read that spirits can attach themselves to houses, objects, or rarely people. Yet, I have a male spirit who has been with me since birth, according to psychics. I can't figure out why. One night, before leaving for vacation, I decided to record myself sleeping to hear if I snored. My mom had teased me about it. The next morning, I listened to the recording and was startled to hear constant breathing. Even stranger, every time I moved in my sleep, I heard a whispered, "shoo." That night was the beginning of my journey to better understand this spirit. For about a year now, I've been waking up feeling physically drained, as if I'd been hit by a truck instead of having a good night's rest. My parakeet chirps loudly whenever the spirit is near, which is how I often know he's around. After that initial night, I started recording about 2 hours after I fall asleep to document these experiences. Ever since I was a child, my mom told me I talked in my sleep. In one of the recordings, I heard myself say, "Don't go away." Then, for the first time, I heard the spirit reply in a whispered voice, "I have to." I know this might sound unbelievable, but I also hear kissing sounds on the recordings. When I sleep, I feel him pat my head gently before I drift off, especially when my depression worsens. His presence becomes more noticeable during those times, almost as if he's trying to comfort me. Recently, I felt pressure against my feet and legs, like a slow, rhythmic massage. The first time it happened, I was terrified and started crying. It took him about 2 weeks to start doing it again, as if he was trying to respect my fear. Now, it feels more comforting than scary. I come from a Hispanic family that only speaks Spanish. No one in my family who has passed away knew English, so this spirit doesn't seem to be connected to them. That leaves me wondering, why me? From what I've read, spirits often attach to people they have a connection with, but I can't find any ties between us. Unlike the dramatic depictions in movies, his presence doesn't bring cold spots or flickering lights. It's more subtle. Sometimes my belongings get misplaced, only to reappear on my bed or on the floor in plain sight. Other than that, there's no chaos, no flying objects or ominous signs. He's not playful or frightening, just present. When I search online about attached spirits, most of what I find are ways to get rid of them. But I don't want to get rid of him. He's helped me through my depression by keeping me company. When I'm upset, he pats my head or soothes me in some way. It's not like feeling a hand or fingers, just a gentle, repetitive pressure, like a massage. I've grown to appreciate his presence, as he gives me an outlet to express myself without judgment. Even though he doesn't speak directly to me, his touches, or the occasional breath on my neck, let me know he's listening. I started recording his visits on August 1st, 2010, and I've been keeping a record ever since. I haven't shared these recordings with anyone because I'm afraid they'll think I'm strange. But in them, I often hear him breathing, and sometimes there are more kissing noises. It's made me wonder, is it possible for a spirit to fall in love with someone? The stories I've found about this seem far-fetched or fictional, but the kissing noises make me question what's really going on. Could he be kissing me while I sleep? I know the spirit isn't tied to my house because I've moved 3 times, and he's followed me every time. He isn't connected to any object, as far as I know. He speaks English, so he doesn't appear to be a family member. That leaves me asking, why me? Does he need my help? Does he expect something from me? I don't feel afraid of him anymore, but I wonder if continuing to interact with him is healthy. How can I find out why he's with me instead of his own family or someone he knew in life? Is there a way to help him move on if that's what he needs? This is a story about 2 ghost hunts I went on. The first was with my ex-girlfriend, Mariel, and the second with my fiancée Caitlin, and friends Laurel, Colton, and Kelly. A few years back, when I was dating Mariel, I shared all my ghost stories with her, and she told me about a local legend surrounding the Lebanon Mountain Church and Cemetery. The story goes that the church was shut down in the 1980s after the priest allegedly murdered someone. Whether or not that's true, the church is undeniably boarded up and abandoned, and the headstones in the cemetery are far older than the 1980s, some dating back to the 1890s. I wasn't convinced by the legend but decided to check it out anyway. Mariel and I visited the church and wandered the cemetery while she snapped pictures. I didn't sense any presence, and there was nothing unusual in the photos that made me believe it was haunted. Then she mentioned another haunted location nearby, an old farmhouse. Curious, we decided to check it out. As soon as we pulled into the farmhouse driveway, I felt a chill run down my spine, and Mariel immediately refused to leave the van. She took photos of me from the vehicle as I approached the house, and every picture she took showed a faint white mist directly behind me, no matter where I stood. Mariel has kept those photos, but I've shown them to friends who agree they're chilling. One of my friends is even trying to retrieve the photos from Mariel so I can share them. Fast forward to September, just before my birthday. I convinced my fiancée Caitlin and friends Laurel, Colton, and Kelly to join me on a return trip to the church and farmhouse. Everyone was intrigued, eager to take their own pictures and investigate. This time, we came prepared with Caitlin's high-tech camera, Laurel's professional-grade equipment, and a Zoom handy recorder for EVPs. We visited the church first. Right away, Laurel's camera began malfunctioning. Strangely, it would only take photos of headstones, nothing else, until we left the cemetery. Colton and I asked aloud why the camera wouldn't work, and we heard faint, eerie noises in response, but unfortunately, due to user error, our EVP settings were too low to properly capture the sounds. Disappointed, we checked the photos. Laurel's shots were exclusively of headstones, while Caitlin had some images of the surroundings, but nothing definitive. After leaving the church, it took us a while to find the farmhouse again due to my terrible sense of direction. On the way, Laurel's camera mysteriously started working again, and we all felt a renewed excitement. When we finally arrived at the farmhouse, a heavy chill washed over our vehicle. The girls immediately began taking pictures, while Colton and I looked for a way into the boarded-up building. Kelly refused to leave the car. We heard strange noises coming from inside the house, like footsteps and doors creaking. Although we couldn't see anything in the pictures, the presence was undeniable. Determined to investigate, Colton and I removed the boards from one of the doors and went inside. As soon as we entered, Colton saw a tall, dark figure dart past him, and I heard a loud creak from upstairs. The inside of the house was severely fire-damaged, and when we stepped into the most charred room, an overwhelming sense of helplessness hit us. It was so intense that we struggled to leave the room. We didn't find anything tangible, but the experience left a lasting impression. Back at the car, Colton and Kelly, the biggest skeptics in our group, were visibly shaken. On the way to the site, they had mocked the idea of ghosts, but by the end of the night, both were firm believers. In fact, they're now eager to return for another investigation. Our group is even considering starting our own amateur paranormal investigation team. This experience solidified my belief in the paranormal, and I'm excited to go back, this time with better equipment and techniques. If anyone in Western New Jersey or Eastern Pennsylvania wants to join us or share tips, let me know. The journey is just beginning. I'm a 40-year-old former skeptic from New Jersey. For most of my life, I didn't believe in ghosts, spirits, or any form of afterlife. I was certain about what I thought was true. Then, a series of events in my life began to challenge everything I believed. In my previous story, I shared what first opened my mind to the possibility of the paranormal. Since then, I've started keeping a journal of my experiences, as a poster on this site suggested. I wanted to evaluate these events over time to see if any patterns emerged. One thing I've noticed is that many of these experiences seem connected to my garage, which was partly my dad's workshop. Here are the entries from my journal. On May 17, 2010, I felt cobweb-like sensations on my face throughout the day, mostly on the right side. It was as if something was faintly brushing against my skin. This feeling recurred randomly over the next several weeks, always on my face. I couldn't explain it. As of August 2010, this still happens at random times. While typing this entry, something strange happened. My wireless keyboard's J key started typing continuously on its own. J J J J J J J J J J. I tried pressing the key to stop it, but it wasn't stuck. I had to remove the batteries to make it stop. The letter J doesn't hold much significance for me, though my sister's name starts with J, and she's fine. The next day, at work, I was bent over, squatting to help a student, when I felt two distinct taps on my right tricep, like someone trying to get my attention. I turned around, expecting to see a student, but there was no one nearby, just two students seated at their desks, too far away to have touched me. It was unsettling yet oddly exhilarating. This was my second unexplained experience at work, both in the 5th grade hallway. I wonder if it's connected to the students we've lost over the years due to illness. On June 28, 2010, I paused a game on my Droid phone, placed it on my bed, and left the room for a soda. When I returned 30 seconds later, the game was still paused, but 3 of my teleport towers had been sold. To sell them, you'd have to manually select each one and confirm. No one else was home, and the phone was untouched. On July 1st, 2010, the light to the back porch was on. The switch, located in the garage, was flipped to the on position. I hadn't touched it, and it was off earlier in the day. The switch is in a spot where it's impossible to accidentally bump it, yet it was on. On August 15th, 2010, my Droid phone was plugged in, charging, and locked in sleep mode. Suddenly, it turned on, unlocked itself, and started playing music on Pandora radio. To do this, you'd need to press a button to wake the screen, then slide to unlock, and manually open the app. I received no calls or notifications. It scared the heck out of me. On August 20th, 2010, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of red light near my bookshelf. When I turned, it was gone. I'm unsure if this was paranormal or just my peripheral vision playing tricks. On October 8th, 2010, my dad's birthday, my mom called emotional, saying she smelled his cologne all day. She woke up to the scent, and it lingered around her. This didn't happen to me, but I included it because it felt significant. On October 14th, 2010, my garage door began opening and closing randomly. It's a 20-year-old opener that doesn't use modern RF frequencies. I eventually unplugged it to ensure it wouldn't stay open while I was away. While this could be electrical, it still felt strange. On October 15th, 2010, when I came home from work, I was hit with an overpowering smell of sour milk. It started in the garage and got stronger inside the house, but it didn't seem to come from anywhere specific. I checked the kitchen and garage freezer, but everything was fine. The smell dissipated after a few minutes. This experience hit me deeply. My dad and I owned an ice cream shop for 10 years, 1989 to 1999, and sour milk was a familiar scent during those years. I hadn't smelled anything like it in over a decade. I wasn't thinking about my dad that day, but I wonder if this was his way of reminding me he's still around. These experiences have made me question the world around me. They've been subtle, but they feel significant. Is it possible my dad's spirit is connected to the garage, his old workshop? Or are these just coincidences? I'm still trying to piece everything together, but keeping this journal has helped me notice the connections and reflect on the moments that might otherwise go unnoticed. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Since I was a child, I felt like a magnet for spirits. Sometimes I sense them, sometimes I see them, and sometimes I hear them. It's never been something I've been comfortable with, and there are times I feel like I'm going crazy. The fear of being judged keeps me from talking about it openly, and no one wants to feel like they're losing their mind. 2 years ago, I moved from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. For a while, I didn't have any paranormal experiences, but everything changed a year ago when I had my daughter. Strange things started happening frequently. At night, I'd wake up feeling like something was touching me. My daughter, who slept in the same room at the time, would let out blood-curdling screams. I assumed she was hungry or needed a diaper change, so I'd get up to care for her, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. It made me uneasy, and I became increasingly angry for no apparent reason. This caused constant arguments with my boyfriend. On top of it all, I began having recurring dreams of a man staring at me in the darkened house. During Thanksgiving in 2010, my boyfriend's family and I were in his family's living room. His cousin was playing with our daughter while he and his uncle played acoustic guitar. The room is next to the front door, and out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw someone stand up and leave their seat. When I looked, I saw an old man with white hair, wearing something red, walk through the door and past the staircase. I was startled. Who was this random man? I thought I must have been imagining it. My boyfriend's aunt noticed my unease and asked what was wrong. When I described what I'd seen, she and her husband said simultaneously, "That's Phil's father." It was my boyfriend's grandfather, who had been dead for over 10 years. They showed me a photo of him, and it was the man I'd seen walk through the door. After that, the activity intensified. My daughter's toys would light up and turn on by themselves. She woke up crying worse than ever, and the touching at night became more frequent. My boyfriend began noticing things too. In December of 2010, we moved into our current apartment. At first, I felt happy and relieved, thinking I had left whatever was causing the unease behind. For about a month, everything was peaceful. No strange sensations, no disturbances. Then one day, small items in the bathroom began falling off the shelves. I didn't think much of it. Later that day, while putting away groceries, I heard my daughter laughing and talking. When I checked, she was still sound asleep in her car seat, exactly where we'd left her. Moments later, I heard her again, but she hadn't moved. That night, the touching started again while I was sleeping, and I wanted to cry. I thought I had finally escaped this presence. Another night, after my daughter woke up screaming, I brought her into bed with me. As I comforted her, I heard a woman's voice say my name, Katie. I cried myself to sleep that night, overwhelmed with fear. I decided I couldn't let this presence know it frightened me anymore. So when I felt it touch me, I kept my eyes closed and pretended to sleep. One day, while I was showering, my daughter kept crawling to the tub and opening the curtain. I asked her to stop, worried about water getting on the floor. After the last time, I heard her crawl away, but the curtain flew open and a shelf in the shower fell over. When I peeked out, I saw her sticking out of her bedroom doorway. There was no way she could have moved that fast. I ignored it, closed the curtain, and continued my shower. Moments later, I felt a poke in the middle of my back. I turned and shouted, "You need to leave my family and me alone now." After that, the touching slowed down, but strange things still happened. While bathing my daughter one night, I felt someone standing over me. My daughter stopped playing, stared upward, and moved her eyes back and forth as if following something. Then she started crying. Later, I began hearing dishes move in the kitchen, and objects fell more frequently from the bathroom shelves. The activity escalated when I began feeling physical pushes while sleeping. I accused my boyfriend, but he was always fast asleep. He started seeing things too, especially in the hallway at night. I hate to admit it, but I felt relief that he was noticing these things. I no longer felt like I was going insane. One morning, I heard my boyfriend talking to my daughter as she cried in her room. When I got up to check, he was still asleep beside me. I ran to her room, grabbed her, and stayed in bed, terrified. Doors began closing by themselves, and my sleep suffered as the activity continued. The breaking point came one night when I saw him. My daughter was crying, and as I prepared to get up, I looked toward the door and saw a little boy. He wore a turquoise sweatshirt over a collared white shirt and had a bowl cut. The rest of his body was detailed, but his face was black. No eyes, no mouth, just darkness. I stared for what felt like a minute before hiding under the covers. I knew I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. For most of my life, I was a skeptic, a retired scientist with a PhD in physical chemistry, someone who placed faith in the tangible and provable. Ghosts, spirits, or any notions of the afterlife. I dismissed them outright. That certainty started to shift after my wife's passing, and I've since found myself reconsidering the possibilities. Are the spirits of loved ones truly among us, visiting from time to time? I now believe they might be. My brother-in-law first shared with me a peculiar belief. He said coins mysteriously found in odd places, on the floor, in a shoe, could be signs left by a happy spirit. After his wife passed away, he found such coins several times under strange circumstances. Skeptical, I asked him, where would the spirits even get the coins? He didn't have an answer, and I dismissed the idea as superstition. Around the same time, a widowed neighbor who claimed to have psychic abilities told me of an incident involving her late husband. She entered her house one day, and a light turned on without her touching it. She addressed her husband aloud, asking, "If you can hear me, turn the light on again." The light turned on. She tried again, asking, "If you can see me, turn the light on again." But this time it stayed off. She concluded that spirits can hear us but not see us. Even then, I couldn't accept it. I thought, if a spirit can do one thing, shouldn't it also be able to do the other? Then my own experiences began. The first incident occurred on the night of my wife's passing. She was taking her usual after-dinner nap, afflicted as she was by type 2 diabetes, spinal stenosis, and heart arrhythmia. She suddenly awoke, looked at the TV, and asked, "What's this?" I replied, "The ball game," and she seemed to drift back to sleep. Moments later, the smoke alarm buzzed briefly, startling me. I looked for smoke but found none. I assumed the battery might need replacing, but when I tested it with my voltmeter, it was fine. As I replaced the battery, the alarm buzzed again. I found this strange but didn't dwell on it. A few minutes later, I noticed my wife wasn't moving. She was cold to the touch and I couldn't detect a pulse. I called 911, and when the ambulance arrived, a policeman accompanied the EMTs and asked me to wait in another room. While there, I called my son to let him know what had happened. The officer later informed me that my wife had been pronounced dead. As he was speaking to me, we stood directly under the smoke alarm, and it buzzed briefly again. Frustrated, I looked up and said aloud, "Now stop that." The officer, without hesitation, said, "She's trying to say goodbye to you." I hadn't considered that possibility until he mentioned it, but it resonated. Later that night, my son and his family arrived. Exhausted, I set my radio alarm for 9 a.m. to ensure we could get some sleep and still make funeral arrangements early. When the alarm rang, I decided to sleep another 15 minutes and reset it for 9:15. Yet when it went off again, the clock read 9:07. Checking the settings, I saw that I had indeed set it for 9:15. I turned to my son and said, "I guess that was Mom saying goodbye to you." Months later, after I'd moved closer to my son, new incidents began to occur. One day, my GPS unit, sitting untouched on the dining table, spoke out, "At the end of the street, turn left." The button to activate it is recessed, requiring deliberate effort to press. Yet it had turned on by itself. A month later, it happened again. Then there's the touch-on lamp in my home, which has turned on 3 times while I was nowhere near it. Twice, I found coins on the floor near my bed, coins that hadn't been there before. To a former skeptic, these events offer a compelling narrative. I've come to believe that my wife is reaching out, letting me know she's happy. When these moments happen now, I simply smile and say, "Hi, Kathy." Am I fooling myself? Perhaps. But if I have a choice to believe or not, I choose to believe. It brings me comfort to think she's still here in some way, reminding me that love transcends even the greatest of divides. As for where the spirits get the coins, that I still don't know.